Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the 2021 PRCA Measurement Conference in partnership with CARMA, our media evaluation and monitoring partners for ECO and PRCA. If you don't know me, my name's Steve Miller. I'm the Membership and Commercial Director at PRCA and ECO, and I have great pleasure in opening today's conference. We've got some great sessions lined up for this afternoon, looking at all the latest insights, trends, and opportunities impacting PR measurement. Of course, this topic is more important than ever as global markets emerge from the pandemic and public relations budgets are facing greater scrutiny than ever before. So today's conference has been designed to ensure strategic and robust measurement is no longer an afterthought and will hopefully help equip everyone listening today with a best practice understanding of how to measure PR and create meaningful business impacts in 2022 and beyond. So here's the rather dull housekeeping notes. If you've not heard this before, I don't know where you've been. The conference today is being recorded. So we'll send out a link of the recording afterwards. So no rude words or profanities, please, because it will be forever stored. The conference is running until 3:45 this afternoon, and we'll have a break at 2:15 until 2:30. So that's 15 minutes to make a quick cuppa, check your emails, and perhaps go and measure something. Finally, we'd like to make today's conference as interactive as possible. So please do use the Zoom chat to post your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the afternoon. Do also post about the event on social media using the hashtag. It's easy to remember. PRCA Measurement Conf. So that's PR Measurement Conference. And I think one of my colleagues is going to put that into the chat. So without further ado, let's kick off the first session for today, which is exploring measurement maturity and frameworks. To present this session, please welcome the evergreen Jonna Burke, Global Managing Director at AMEC, or AMEC. I think we voted to name it AMEC. That's the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communications. Good morning, Jonna. What time is it over there?
Good morning, Steve Miller. It is 5:30 a.m.
OMG. Okay. And this is the last session in what's been a very busy measurement month. So leaving the best till last, we hope.
Yes, no, this has been a most excellent measurement month. And, I think there's been a lot of great content, a lot of great discussions that just further fuel what you just said. It's an important time to be in measurement. And those communicators who aren't embracing this and making this part of their everyday life are going to find greater challenges in the future.
Fantastic. So you're going to present, and then you'll be joined by Richard Bagnall, Global Co-Managing Partner and CEO, Europe and Americas for CARMA, and also an Arsenal fan, so obviously of good taste. He'll follow up for some questions for you, Jonna. So for everyone, please remember to post any burning questions you have in the Zoom chat throughout the session, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. Now, Jonna, I did have a good look through the internet to see if I can find some jokes about measurement. Not many, but I did find one. Can I try it on you?
You can try it.
Okay. So how do you measure a red hot chili pepper?
How?
You give it away, give it away, give it away now. Way, W-E-I-G-H-T. Never mind. That's for our older viewers. Anyway.
No, Steve. This was me being kind. This was a kind response.
Anyway, less of the dad jokes, onto the proper stuff. Over to you, Jonna.
Thanks so much, Steve. And I really think that they should have probably been clear that there was no curse words or profanity during the presentation, because now it's going to be a lot shorter and leave more room for Richard's questions. Just kidding. Thank you so much for having me here. It's always a pleasure to partner with PRCA and obviously with CARMA and our current chair, Richard Bagnall. So I'm Jonna Burke, the Global Managing Director of AMAC. And since you are here in my home, I feel it's only appropriate to introduce you to a potential bonus presenter. This is Jamie. He's normally the strong, quiet type, but on occasion, I will say something and he will have a very strong reaction to it, which time we have no choice but to sit up and listen to his insights and angles on all that is measurement and evaluation. Now, under the best of circumstances, face-to-face, of which many of us have not had in 22 plus months, communication is difficult. And so no one undervalues or underestimates the work that's being done in communication right now. And I think that's one of my, if there is a silver lining to all that has been COVID, it is that communicators have been deemed and have that place as essential. And I would contend that we absolutely have to hold on to that. And that means applying frameworks, applying methodology that is business practice consistent to show and demonstrate the value, or in this case, in the alliterative world of the PRCA, the power of PR every day and every opportunity that you have. And that requires setting out and setting on that objective with a mission. And unfortunately, the days of, here's what we did, here's our report card, those are gone, right? That is not demonstrating the power or the influence of communication or public relations. And it's important to understand this because without understanding that you aren't just giving your report card, you aren't just, showing the number of press releases, the number of interviews, the number of hits to a website that have come from this in a silo, you aren't showing the value for your organization. And probably one of the most common questions, I guess, what is the one metric we have to use? Well, if there was a silver bullet, life would be so much easier. Unfortunately, there's not. It takes the hard work. It takes you saying, okay, what is the purpose of what we're doing? And that means understanding the need behind the need. It isn't looking at those counts and amounts. We talk a lot about, reporting to the C-suite. In my 30 plus years, I have never had a CEO say, Jonna, I just have to say, the thing that really keeps me up at night, restless, exhausted, is our AVEs. That just doesn't happen, right? That is something that we have plugged into there because it is some number that we can get and plug a dollar sign in front of it. And I know that this problem is less in the UK. It has a maturity across the world that is very different, but please know that if you are trying to plug in some standard metric that you've been given in a dashboard, without qualifying that and understanding the need behind the need of why you would report on that to your C-suite, you're probably creating noise and havoc for them that isn't demonstrating the value or the power of communication. Because if you're not, that's where you fall into the trap of what I like to call word soup, right? We get so wrapped up around what we're doing. And I know that there has been a great study with the PRCA and people like Stephen Waddington and James Crawford and Stella Bales looking at search. And this is incredibly powerful and important, a really good starting point for people because oftentimes communicators have a beautiful way with words. They are able to say and express things visually and meaningful. And you think that makes sense to me. But if that isn't the way that your stakeholders, that your key target audiences are then looking for your information, it doesn't matter how beautifully you put it. In the world of acronyms, understand what those mean, understand how you're going to drive some of those traffic. And I definitely recommend looking at that search report that they've put together because it really is powerful because it can help guide and inspire so much of that process. It's going to help when you're looking at those business goals and how you're looking at some of those quantitative driving traffic. It's going to help you break down some of those operational goals. What are you trying to manage? What are some of the risks that you're looking at? And then it's going to help support and build the strategy of how you plan to achieve those goals that you're looking for. And I would also contend that everyone needs a contrarian. You need someone on your team that does not think exactly like you think, or even remotely like you think, so that they can push back against some of these ideas that you think are a home run. Fully vet those. I've been in plenty of meetings, and that is not always a welcome challenge of like, just let's get through this. But in the long run, it will serve you so well. And so please have a contrarian there that's saying, what does this mean? I used to call it the 5-year-old niece effect and the why. Make sure that it is a clear understanding, so that as you need to be creative, as you need to be agile in a campaign or a program that is or isn't working as you thought it might, when you are better and when you're able to more effectively plan, this experience, going through that with your contrarian, is going to make you better equipped to be able to navigate any of those challenges that you're going to see in the future. And it's much better to have that in your plan, in your strategy, than to have that, oh, heck moment, since Steve said we can't use any profanity, that you're going through and being able to look through that. Back in 2010, AMEC and some very esteemed communicators, educators, academics, and professionals got together and confirmed the Barcelona principles. And these are these 7 guiding principles that can help you and your team look at what's going on in your organization and be able to set up your own framework and infrastructure of knowing that you are looking at things like in a meaningful way for your organization. These are not exhaustive. This is not an element that, some gotcha of like, well, this should really be there. Sure, it should. And that's why this is Barcelona Principles 3.0. This is the 3rd iteration of the Barcelona Principles. And if you go to the AMEC website and to show your support for the Barcelona Principles, that you and your organization operate aligned with these principles, it's important for a couple of reasons. It's important because it is showing that you are committed to being held accountable to what those efforts are. It also shows that your organization is endorsing and aligning with best practice. And it's also going to take you through these elements here of showing you the what to do and the what not to do in this latest update. And that includes how to operationalize with some societal factors. COVID, anyone? So understanding how you can align, how you can apply that is really critical. Because when you're looking at building your own structure using something that's already in place, it's important to understand what those best practices are and then challenge your team accordingly. There are different types of, inquiries and reasons why people use data. I love this example here because it is going to also show you where you are, why you're doing this. And then if someone brings a request to you, if someone brings something that is a challenge to you, it's going to give you the ability to then look and see, okay, where are you in this process? Why are you asking me for this? And then here's what's normally associated with this type of request. What's the reason behind your ask? And again, the more you look and challenge some of those, standard requests and understand the need behind the need, that's what's going to set you up, position you, and align you to then build and develop a better measurement, evaluation, and results that you need to be able to show that. It's so easy to talk about, going from a plan to a strategy, but if you really want to be effective, you have to know where you are on your particular journey and how you're getting started. And that's why we have the AMEC Measurement Maturity Mapper. And this is about a 6 to 8 minute diagnostic that you can do with your team, with your clients, with your integrated partners to collaborate with, to really get a fair assessment of where you are on your measurement journey. After you complete the diagnostic, it's going to tell you if you're at the beginning level, those steps that you would need to take to get to the intermediate level. If you're at an intermediate, what you would need to take to get to that advanced level. And now once everyone's on the same page of saying, okay, here's realistically where we are with our budget, with our capacity, with our capabilities, with what we have coming in, now you're able to apply those findings and identify the why. You always want to start with the end in need. And that is because if you're trying to achieve something great, you need to understand not just what the communication factors are, the PR factors, but how you're going to align with the overarching organizational objective, what you're trying to achieve, how communications can realistically contribute towards that. What is the human problem you're trying to solve? I know that throughout the day today, you have a couple of great panels on tech, on artificial intelligence, and no matter what the sexy terms of today are, more than likely, your stakeholders that you're trying to target are still human. And don't forget that human factor of how you're looking to get to them. And one of the ways that you can do that is using the integrated evaluation framework. This is going to keep that humanity tethered to everything that you're doing, because leaders know, your leaders, this is the great thing. You aren't bringing something when you're using the integrated evaluation framework to your management team and they're going to think, what has PR done now? This makes, this feels like something that they shouldn't, be talking about. This makes no sense. It's not. This is a business process that would be embraced by your executive team in most cases. And they are delighted when PR and communicators bring this forward because they know how to optimize programs. And to be able to see you bringing a framework, whether it's something that you're going to augment, it's something that you're using as a starting point, or it's something that you're going to be able to then integrate with your CRM, with any of the other APIs or elements that maybe a larger data team is taking in. This gives confidence in how you're bringing in information and how you are looking objectively at what communication can and can't do in order to demonstrate its power. And this, when we're talking about it, there are a lot of reasons that you look at this. And this is one of the resources in the integrated evaluation framework to give you the ability to look at increased organizational agility. And that is showing a deep knowledge, a high impact process. And that means it's going to change the way things are being done more quickly, easily, and with agility. And there is nothing that we all need more in the world of pivot. So that's why this is such a critical piece, to be able to show increased organizational performance, enhanced culture, things that, all as we look to the internal stakeholders in the last 22 months, they have been a prime target. And now with talent and retention being so in demand, this is even more critical that you can use this to apply and understand what those elements are. It's going to help you as you're planning for better technology outcomes. Technology is one of the ways that people are looking to improve their process performance on a regular basis. Your IT team is constantly making investments. They aren't just saying, oh no, I think this is going to be fine. They're using patches, they're using software, they're using hardware. Make sure that you understand that and how that can affect how you're able to drive that performance through communication, looking to level and scale that up. Because when you're looking at that, now that's what's going to give you this ability to take a look at the objectives, your outtakes, your outcomes, and the impact of communication. And this is actually the grid system that we use in the integrated evaluation framework, designed to be very easy, very user-friendly, so that as you are collaborating with your paid, earned, shared, owned compatriots, you are able to then look at all of those elements where they belong. What are those outtakes? What do you want people to think and do differently as a result of your communication? The outcomes, what do you want people to feel differently as a result of your communication? And then ultimately that impact. And this is where the integrated evaluation framework is so powerful, because no longer are there silos and barriers of like, oh, I can't get this information. No, this is ours. This isn't yours. Impact is taking credit in full or in part to your attribution of what you're trying to do. And it's really important, but this isn't the place to stop. This is the place where you're just getting started. And this is why planning is so critical. As you're looking at, putting together your first framework, and this is all done in a PDF online. It's all anonymized data. This is never shared with anyone. This is ambiguous on the back end. All we have is kind of the user access, the number of frameworks that are created, not that other information. It is really critical to understand how this can help you work with your organization. Because when you're talking about setting those objectives and having that strategy, you want to think about those external inputs and factors. What else is going on in your category, in your industry, or the world at large? How are you going to tackle and manage constraints that might be going on, like work from home, COVID, different ways that people are changing their own behavior that may have been unpredicted for you before, and looking at your channel selection. This is where you want to commit to that, to understand who you're reaching where, so that you're getting the most meaningful message to people where it matters to them, to create a smaller cycle of your communication. Because when you're looking at planning as a function of management, and it absolutely is, that's where you're bringing that extra power of PR to the table of your management. And it involves setting those goals and setting those specific and measurable goals. And there is no reason, there's no accident that setting measurable goals is Barcelona principle number one, because it is so critical in this piece. You have to recognize what is the need for the action that you're trying to prepare for, and then how you're going to align with that. And I would always say, everyone is familiar with setting these SMART business objectives, the specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. But we like to add an E and an R to that. And the E can either stand for can be evaluated. It can also be ethical. It's important how you're curating, how you're aggregating that content. And then the R, it's results driven. Or if you want to talk to this in your management team, you are creating something that is going to revolutionize what you're doing. It's going to give that aha moment. It's going to give that value. And it's going to allow you to move from those elements that might be kind of those importance and features. And then it's going to be able to add that so that this becomes a function of management, and it's something that they rely more heavily on moving forward. Because when you're brainstorming where you're going to end up in that hierarchy, where you're going to end up for those challenges, what are those elements that are kind of those internal of your department factors, and what are those things that are truly laddering up to your organization? I love this framework because it's going to allow you to use and to highlight these to be able to get both the qualitative and the qualitative of looking at those elements. Because when you are there and you're asking, okay, how will we earn their attention? When we're looking at our audience and we're doing some customer journey mapping, what does this really mean? What is that problem that we're trying to solve? What will it look like when we're done? What is our ideal when we're done? And then as you're navigating that path going through, how does that change? And it wouldn't be complete without talking about making that drive to those SMART objectives. I think I judge a lot of awards in the industry, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges. That's why when we see some of these vanity metrics that are used at the conclusion, it's because there weren't strong, sustainable goals set forward at the onset, giving them those things that they could anchor to be able to demonstrate the wins and the losses of how your elements are working. And it's really important to look at all of those elements and not to be afraid of failure. And that's the one thing that I really try to talk about a lot, because in PR, we always want to have, the positive, we're, putting the positive angle on things. We're always optimists in many cases. And that's okay. You can be an optimist, but if you don't understand your failures, you are destined to repeat them. And there is not an executive or a C-suite out there that has 100% success. It just doesn't happen. They understand failure. They understand it and they can respect it. If you're then able to say, and by the use of data, we know why we failed. We know how we're going to avoid that failure moving forward. And there is trust. And that's where you build that rapport and that value. Because once you have those aligned objectives, now it makes a lot more sense what you're going to be doing strategically across your paid, earned, shared, and owned elements. And when you're looking at that, that's where you're keeping in mind the markets, the issues, all of those different stakeholders. And all stakeholders are not created equal, and all stakeholders do not care about every piece of data that you've ever been able to acquire. And so making sure that you're looking at these elements in both a quantitative and a qualitative way grows increasingly important as you look at that. Now, as you move to those outtakes and you're trying to find out, okay, what do they think and feel at this point? And then you're looking to those outcomes. What are you hoping to shift? The better you have those data, those attribution models that I know they're going to be talking about in some of those future things. Now you're going to be able to see and adjust the communication accordingly, because when you're looking at these elements, now this is creating a plan of action and accountability for you. Because if something is not measurable, it's not an objective. And that's the part that you need to understand. It could read beautifully, it could make sense to everyone, but it has to be measurable in order to be an objective. And that's where you're able to then acquire the impact. What is it that you have been able to do? And this is where you're going to apply those things like your social listening, your government relations, your public relations, any of the public affairs, any events that you're doing, your customer service. All of those things are going to go into that, your web analytics for the owned. And this is really important because this is where you're asked, what did we achieve, right? Did we meet our objectives? What did we learn? Can we apply any of those learnings? Was there something that shifted that we didn't anticipate? How do we apply that into future campaigns? How can we help educate our collaborating partners across this integrated evaluation framework for the things that we're finding. Because what we know is that PR works, communications works, advertising works, and marketing works, but they all work exponentially better when they're all working together. And that's where, in using a framework and you see those elements that are all coalescing at the same time, it's going to give you that amplification effect, and it's going to be transparent in your organization where you're focused, what your mission is, making a lot of those vanity metrics absolutely useless. One of the best resources put forward, I believe, is the taxonomy part of the integrated evaluation framework. And that is, as you're trying to break down those silos or probe some of your clients for additional information, these are going to give you some of those cues of how you can break through that and what level in that cycle in the framework it's going to take effect, who's going to be accountable for that, who those champions are, and what that's going to look like. Because when you're able to apply those metrics and milestones throughout, that's what's going to give you the value added and the trust of those on your team. Because when you're looking at those behavior changes, it is so important that you are evaluating the quantitative and the qualitative together. Some of those quantitative elements that you might use in an index can be an early indicator that something's working great or something's not working. And the more you're looking at that on a regular basis, it's going to give you the ability to look at that for trends, for some of those, pivot points that your market might have. But you always have to have that level of qualitative analysis. And when we look at things, so many times people say, well, what should I be asking for in my dashboard? Well, if you haven't shared what your objective is with your partner, no matter who you're working with, whatever your dashboard results are not insights more than likely. And so if you don't have someone who's able to read, understand, and interpret data on your team, you need to understand who in your organization is. And I would contend that while there has to be some crossover with PR and communications, more importantly, you need to be able to ask those probing questions so that you can understand, okay, of this, what does this mean? Because when you're looking at the methodology of how you're bringing in data, that can help influence how you're looking at it moving forward and give trust and validity to your executive team for how you're presenting that. Because that balance is so delicate. And when you're looking at those elements, I would always point to something like reputation. Reputation is not something that is a single scorecard. There are so many factors that go into that, for very different reasons, for very different elements. And so some of the basics that you should always include in that is trust. Does your audience trust your brand, your organization, the perception? What are those traits that, or the attributes do they associate with your brand? It's really important to know and align with that. And then the advocacy, how likely are they to recommend you? Those are some of those factors that you can use to build a scorecard to get to some, aggregated number. But it's important that you understand the methodology, all of that data that goes in behind that in order to be successful. Because so many times what we see are people reporting on everything that they've ever seen. They're reporting on these exhaustive metrics. And that's where we look at, the confusion. And that's where PR really loses some of their authority and some of their impact, because there is this overwhelming desire to show that report card, right? Look what we did. This is all of it. Okay, now you tell me what I need to do because it's data and I'm scared. Don't be scared. Boil this down. Global organizations are not reporting on every metric that they've ever seen. They are doing this in a very strategic way. And so they're looking at maybe they're part of a much larger report. There was a great session for Measurement Month yesterday with, I think it was CARMA and one of their clients. I'm drawing a total blank now, but they were talking about, they're a global organization. I think they get 3 slides in a 50-page report. Understanding then how you're impacting them, what those things are that matter, and not reporting on everything that is not only going to confuse people, but it is absolutely going to invert that decision-making tree that your organization needs to have of looking at it with 80% data and 20% emotion in order to be able to planning for the future and have their sights on that. And I would also contend that the number one thing that you should do in looking at your framework and looking at what you're trying to do is we need to stop interrupting what people are interested in and be what people are interested in. And that's where having that customer journey map, looking at those profiles is going to give you and help you avoid those misguided intentions that you might have with the C-suite. and really sets you on a path that's going to be effective. And when you push back and you're asking the why 3 times, or the so what factor, that's what's going to make you stronger and in a better position to answer those questions when they come back over the fence to you. We've aggregated some tips here from our AMEC members about the basic tenets of measurement. And I love these because this is something that are real. They are actionable for you to be able to say, okay, do these things apply for me? So I would encourage all of you to use these as a guide when you're starting those conversations. When you go back and look at your current plan and you're looking to finalize that, and when you're testing yourself and your team for why you're doing what you're doing, why you're pushing out to a channel, why you're taking a time to do an interview, how does it align with the overall objective and how you're going to model that into the other data that is being already valued in your organization. And with that, I leave you with all of the resources that I've talked about here, ways that you can continue to educate yourself, and also ask you to mark your calendar for May 23rd through the 25th. I'm sure Steve Miller already has it in his, for Vienna, Austria, where we'll be talking about the next normal communicators at the data table. And now I think we have some questions.
Jonna, thank you so much. Hello, everyone, as well. Jonna, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation full of great tips and great imagery as always. And particularly thank you for being with us at 5:30 in the morning in Arizona there. We appreciate it. So one of the questions was, would we be sharing these links and resources? So there they are. So that you don't have to write all of this stuff down, there is an easy URL to remember, which is amec.org.com/resources, where you'll find all of this stuff is available. Now, we've had a question, Jonna, from the audience who were asking if you could please just tell us again about SMARTER, what it stands for, just elaborate a little bit more about that. If we could just recap on SMART and SMARTER, please.
Sure. So SMART is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And then we've expanded that because, you know, everything a little bit bigger is better. And that is with an added E. And for that E, you'll decide for your organization if it means can be evaluated, and if it's results driven, or another option is it ethical, how you're using your data, how you're reaching your audiences. I think that is incumbent upon PR and communicators to make sure that staying in compliance of GDPR, because it is part of your reputation and the trust that you have. And that final R that I like is what you're doing revolutionizing something for your organization. Because if you aren't doing something that really matters and you're just marking time, there's no wonder why you're bored with your data, you're bored with things, and you're somewhat desperate to go for the latest vanity metric, the latest big number, the latest shiny thing in the data bag of tricks, and try to create an anchor to that. But until you know what that's going to do in the future, you know, you might be chasing a ghost. And it's important not to have too many vacillations across your reporting, because again, you confuse your audience of what you're trying to convey and how powerful PR can be.
Great, thank you. And a question here on the AMEC framework, saying that there's some metrics that arguably fall under a number of different categories, e.g. outtakes and outcomes, or outcomes and impacts. So what do we do in that situation? Does the framework allow such flexibility? How should that be approached?
Absolutely. I mean, that's where, traditionally we have worked with the academic team, and that's why we're looking at, you know, your outputs, your outcomes, and your outtakes of what you're doing for what your stakeholders are seeing and doing, what you want them to see and do, what their behavior is, how they're changing. But I think it is something that is created as a basis. And luckily, I think the person that's asking me the questions is one of the originators of the framework group, who can talk, you know, for 3 weeks just on this subject, but talking about that it was very intentional to look at this across the marketing funnel to know and understand how your colleagues and your counterparts are going to be able to talk about this and design to set you up for that collaboration. So if it means something different for your marketing counterpart, this can accommodate that. You just need to have that included in your plan and in the strategy of how you're going to be using that across the PESO model.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, John was referring to the fact that I led the work group that developed it, and she's absolutely right. We had to have a broad church that encompassed all different camps, so that the global industry could get behind it, and that included academics, it included practitioners, and it included, you know, PR and comms pros, organizations of all different sizes all the way around the world. And we needed it to be robust and academically agreeable while also being practical and usable. And what it is it's based on something called process evaluation, which is an approach, but it's not, it doesn't have to be rigid. You should tailor it in each and every organization to fit with your requirements. And we're not saying you have to put a certain metric in a certain category. If you want to combine outtakes and outcomes because your PR objective might only be reputation, it might only be to go that far and not to try and drive a sale, that's okay, group them together. So use it as an educational guiding principle, not as something that is set in stone. John, I've got another question or elaboration. I mean, the pandemic changed everything for so many people in the last couple of years. How's that impacted measurement, and what should we be doing differently perhaps as a result of that? Great
question. It has impacted measurement significantly in many ways. A couple of the key ways are those people who were using data and analysis prior to the pandemic, they had to harshly realize that a lot of those benchmarks and a lot of that data was now no longer good. But those people still have an advantage, is that they did have a baseline. And so now they're able to look and see where those changes are. The other reality is the pandemic has made data absolutely critical. As people constrict around, you know, some of the unknown, looking at being a data-led and a data-infused organization is critical. And that's what's helped communicators and PR professionals have that proverbial seat at the table, is when they're able to go forward and say, okay, this is what people are thinking. Now this is what they're doing. This is how they've changed their attitude. This is how they've changed their behavior. That's what's critical. And if you aren't doing that in a data-led way, there's going to be too much skepticism and no trust in your ability to then change and influence and be able to be close and tethered to the stakeholders that you're trying to impact. And I think that's really important when you're looking at, you know, your customer journey mapping and having that type profile. All stakeholders are not created equal. You aren't going to communicate with all of them in the same way. You've got your investors, your customers, your employees. I mean, they will all have a very different profile where they consume information, where they share information. And if you aren't looking at that, not in a big brother creepy way, but in a way that is demonstrating the effectiveness and the power of your PR, you're absolutely missing the power and the influence of data, because it's going to give you some of those early indicators of those shifts. And without that knowledge and understanding, you're constantly playing catch up. And in this market where everything is moving so fast, you don't have that time. And that's why if you are going to be a trusted advisor at the table, it has to be around data that has integrity and that can help lead and guide your organization.
Yeah, okay. We're running out of time, but I've got two quick questions. Steve, your question's been expertly answered by Stuart, so I'm not going to ask that one. But we've got one here for somebody who's working at a young startup, new business, and they would like to establish measurement as a way of working for PR. They doubt there'll be much investment available in 2022. So what kind of simple metrics should this person be looking at to demonstrate value? What tips have you got there for getting started in that kind of situation?
That's a great question. Start with the framework. That's what's going to give you and guide you some of those elements. Even though you're a startup, you have some customer data that you can take in. What is the current sales cycle for your customer when they enter into the funnel to when they're looking forward? Are they then referring your organization? Create some model that you're using there. Do you have testimonials from them? Are they willing to do that? And then applying that throughout each of those phases of how you're looking to build on that. And if you are a startup and you have 100 testimonials today and 100 people who are in your referral network, then your goal should be by the end of next year, we want to have 115 people. Whatever that realistic goal is for you and your organization to be able to set that to. And that requires that collaboration. That requires then aligning how you are putting out your PR messages and then looking comparatively at how that organic search is helping drive some of that traffic to your site based on some of those messages that you've already put out. I think there are a lot of ways that you can connect those dots for your organization. And as Richard said, This is business process management. When you take the integrated evaluation framework to your executive team, you aren't walking in there with, a spinning plate. They understand this. They will welcome this and say, okay, this makes sense. We understand how we need to align this and how we can then apply those findings and build on that to make us all better.
Yeah, that's right. And just a final one, just a quickie. It's come from Susie Murphy, who says, do you have any advice for measuring without set KPIs, e.g. working for a public sector organization? So what about people in those kind of areas where they're struggling to understand perhaps those targets that they need to be aiming for? What tips for them?
No, that's a great question. One of the default ways is always that when you're looking for the need behind the need is to identify how your organization makes, spends, and acquires money. And that will help you guide some of those things. If you are, looking at the public sector, then I think their behaviors, their opinions are increasingly important. And looking at, things like omnibus surveys of being able to see those shifts, being able to see those cycles where there's a migration and a why. Focus groups are very powerful and can be done, without a huge budget, but with sophisticated questioning. And I would always contend to have a very specific methodology, whether it is a focus group, whether it is a larger research panel, a methodology behind those questions, because too many times I see a lot of research, and Richard will test me saying this ad nauseum, but tell me what you want the answer to be, and I'll tell you how to ask the question. So when I'm only seeing results from something, I'm always very curious of how these questions were asked and by whom, what that condition was that they answered that, to understand how that could have some implications and the nuance of why people answered the way they did. And that's why it's important to measure and evaluate throughout the process, because if you identify something that maybe you were misled in how you asked a question, what that answer meant to that person, mark with a C, then making sure that you have those indicators at each process. Say, wait, we need to recalibrate. I think we asked it this way, but here's what it means to someone else. And that's what's going to help steer and guide you. And, don't seek failure, but don't be afraid of it, as long as you can then determine and understand why you failed.
Yeah, great advice. Listen, we've got a lot of people on the webinar today, and on behalf of every one of them, I'd like to extend a virtual massive round of applause and a really big heartfelt thank you to you, John. So everyone knows, Jonna is Amex Global MD. She is based in Arizona, and she seems to work every hour that God sends. And as we know, she began her presentation this morning at 5:30, and it's been Measurement Month, which is an insanely busy time for everyone at Amex, particularly for Jonna. So thank you, Jonna, for being available for our talk today. It's such a great talk. I know Jonna would want me to say that it's the AMEC Awards tonight. So if you're interested in best practice, there'll be a hashtag on Twitter, a hashtag AMEC Awards, and the best of the best will be celebrated. It's not too late to join. If you go to Amec's website, you'll be able to find how you can watch the event. I know a number of people on the webinar today have been shortlisted for awards. And if you're interested in knowing how to apply a framework in your organization, do feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues at CARMA. We spend a lot of our time advising our clients on how to apply the framework exactly to your organizational needs. So I'd be pleased to hear from you and give you some tips and pointers. Jonna, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you, PRCA, for having me.
You bet. Okay, guys, so let me move us straight on to our next panel, which is all about the rise of technology. I've got a really great panel, 3 great speakers who are going to dig into some of the key topics. So if I can introduce them all. First up, we've got Stuart Bruce, who's a PR futurist and managing consultant to Stuart Bruce Associates. Now, Stuart's got more than 30 years experience driving innovation and modernizing the comms profession. He's worked in-house for consultancies and founded and led one of the UK's digital PR consultancies. And today he specializes in helping in-house comms teams and PR agencies to modernize by advising on how they can use innovation and digital transformation to improve how they use technology, people, and professional practice. So Stuart, hopefully you can turn your video on and give us all a wave, but hopefully you're there. I see your still picture.
I'm here, but it's not letting me turn my video on. Bear with me, and I'll be with you soon.
Sure, no challenge too big for a PR futurist to resolve getting that video on. Just appearing there on my screen. Hi, Louise. Welcome to Louise Palmer, the Client Services Director at Wildfire PR. Thrilled to have you with us. Louise has more than 20 years of experience in enterprise consumer technology PR, working with global giants, challenger brands, and tech startups. Louise heads up Wildfire's client services program, and she focuses on initiatives that maintain high retention rates, drive satisfaction, and what today is all about, which is delivering measurable business impact. So great to have you with us, Louise. Thank you for joining, and a warm welcome. And finally, top left as I look, my colleague and friend, Jason Weeks, who's the commercial director at CARMA, CARMA International. Jason's got over 15 years experience, where he's been designing international media intelligence and comms evaluation services for many of the world's largest organizations and most recognized brands and political institutions. So welcome, Jason. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. Just a reminder then that this panel is going to be talking about the rise of technology. And I'll be posing some questions, but please do pop them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen for me to put to the panelists. And I just thought I'd just set the scene before we dig into this about technology, because there was some great research I saw in the US, coming out of the US. There's an organization there called the USC Annenberg Center of Communications and Journalism. And they did some research amongst PRs earlier this year. And the PRs said that 80% said technology would be the next big thing that was going to change their industry. So 80% of PRs felt this. When pushed, 20% said, well, it's going to be AI. And then when pushed further, only 3% said that they had any understanding of what AI actually was. And I think there's a risk and there's a big gap here, isn't there, between what people think is going to matter, what they think the answer is, and what that answer that they think it is can actually do. So I think it's a great way to set the thinking for this this session about what can technology and what can it do for us, particularly from a measurement point of view, but what can it do for PR and comms in general, and what it can't, and what we need to be careful about. And first of all, if you're like me, you'll be hearing a lot of conversation at the moment around the PR tech stack. I mean, it's a sort of junk phrase that I hear constantly. We must have a PR tech stack. It's all about the PR tech stack. But do we know what it is? What is the PR tech stack? What does that actually mean? So I'm gonna come to Stuart first. Stu, what is the PR tech stack? How do we define it? What type of tool, sort of categories, not specific tools, but what sort of category of tool fit within the PR tech stack?
Well, I think the reason that we're all talking about the PR tech stack or the comms tech stack, so Edelman published a report on the future of corporate communications earlier this month, and in that report they referred to it as the comms tech stack. I think the reason we talk about PR tech and comms tech is because the MarTech stack is something that everybody's familiar with, and we kind of know what the tools are that are available to us there. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is to actually try to identify, I mean, it's kind of that perfect question you asked about the categories. And it's a challenge because one of the things that we find is that you have feature creep. So maybe a product or a service will start off in what you would class as one category, but then it starts to add features or it starts to creep. So it becomes in multiple ones. So some of the ones that I've been exploring are the content. So it's tools that can actually help you around creating content. So whether that's kind of graphic tools, video tools, and some of those have got AI behind them now, which is a whole kind of another story. So it can kind of take an article or a blog post and turn it into a short video for you, fully automated. So you've got the content tools. You've got the publishing tools, which are the ones that actually help you to get stuff out there. So whether that's a kind of a WordPress blog, a content management system, or one of the specialist kind of newsroom tools that exist. You've then got the insight tools, and I think these are the ones that kind of people are kind of familiar with. So whether that's kind of things like Google Trends or survey tools, there's a lot of survey tools available to us now. And I think one of the big challenges we've had in the past is it's been really hard to do that market research. It's been really expensive, but now you've got tools that make that a lot more affordable, and you can do things like creating your samples, quite good samples, by kind of recruiting people via social media and that type of thing. You've got your listening and monitoring tools, whichever you want to kind of call them. Your measurement tools. Now, there's a kind of definitely a blurred line between monitoring and measurement. But but in the kind of measurement ones that are kind of fully measurement, it might be things like looking at the analytics tools in your website. It might be looking at things like SimilarWeb, so you can kind of benchmark your data against what other people are doing. The next category I've got is you've got your outreach tools. So these are the ones that kind of, whether it's a media database, an influencer database, and whether or not it's a CRM, so you can actually track those contacts that you're making and manage that process. But that kind of then blurs into things like planning tools, where you kind of, you've got people kind of working together as a team and seeing who made that last contact, seeing who's meant to be doing the next one, the whole kind of task management part of it. So you can see it's quite hard to actually put them into firm categories.
Yeah.
But I think those with productivity are the broad ones. It's just that most are going to fit in more than one category at the same time.
Right. Thank you, Stu. So, Louise, if I come to you and Wildfire PR, does Wildfire PR have a tech stack? I always think of these tech stacks as like a sort of server rack of technology flashing away. But what does it look like at Wildfire PR?
You see, we do technology, well, PR for technology brands doesn't mean to say that we're necessarily big adopters, but I mean, we are. I mean, I think I'd thought about that question beforehand. Stuart's provided quite a comprehensive response. I just went, well, at the moment, it's just a big bunch of tools, isn't it, that we're all using, possibly different ones as an agency. It's often determined by what your clients then ask you to do. I think one that I'd perhaps add there is just even thinking about collaboration. We are integrated in Slack channels, Google Docs. No, we don't use that. Let's use Dropbox. Right, let's just do everything on Word and email. There's so many different approaches to that collaboration side as well. And we do have standard tools that we'll perhaps bring in for monitoring the media databases, our listening capabilities. But a lot of the time that can then be determined by the clients that we work with as well. And they say, actually, we've got a global footprint. Everybody's using this tool, Cision. We'll use that to measure everything across the world. So you're kind of then tied to their approach and what they're doing and the way that they want to work. And I think in some respects, there's a need to perhaps not be guided so much and do that more collaboratively. It's very hard to change something that clients have put in place that is worldwide, especially. But we do tend to find we've just got a mishmash of lots of different stuff, depending on who we're working with and what type of work that we're doing for them.
No harm to be driven by client demand, though. I suggested at an agency. I mean, I hear a lot of, Stu made the point about feature creep in tools. Of course, some of these vendors have had a lot of private equity money put behind them, and they're trying to sort of include every service they possibly can. And one of the reasons is there's this sort of fascination with single sign-on, and that PR and comms professionals don't seem to be able to remember their password in multiple different tools. I wonder, Jason, what your thoughts are on single sign-on versus point solutions. Which is better? What you'd suggest?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, Louise, to hear you talk about having a mishmash of tools. And I think sometimes a mishmash of tools is healthy, because you get specialist tools that are designed for specific features. Stuart talked about feature creep. The industry that I work in the listening and analytics space, and we've seen an awful lot of feature creep, organizations merging, trying to blend a listening tool with a planning tool, with a CRM tool, a collaboration tool. And what's obvious about this, in my experience, is the underlying architecture of these tools is fundamentally different. So if you're trying to have everything in one single sign-on tool, you're not necessarily getting the best. So I think a single sign-on is often desirable because of the ease of use. But I think what you end up getting is perhaps not the optimum service to service your clients.
Yeah. Louise, some PR agencies have been trying to sort of build their own bespoke tools. What's your view? You're a tech PR pro. What's your view, Wellfuz's view about that? I mean, is there conversations in the agency about let's try and build our own bespoke stuff, or are you more than happy to work with these selection different partners?
We have looked at that. We have done a little bit of that ourselves. I think what we found is that there is pull from other clients to say, actually, they like to go with something that they recognise. At least that's kind of something that they can kind of refer back to and think, well, somebody else is using it. It gives a bit more validation to it. And for us, it's more about choosing the right tools that are going to measure and monitor and do the job that we need them to do. And to Jason's point, the mishmash approach, I mean, I like that. I think we've got 3 tools that we use where I know that there's a definite overlap. And one of my other directors was like, well, can't we just use this for the measurement and the media data? And I said, no, it doesn't work like that, because this one is better. And you end up probably paying for and running multiple tools where that feature creep has come in. For us, it's about choosing the right tools that we can stand by. And as an agency say, we think we're bringing the right approach to our clients rather than developing that ourselves.
I think that's right, isn't it? It has to be the best approach. Should win. I mean, Stu, you get to spend a lot of your time looking at these tools and analyzing them, and looking at, you know, the tools that these big monolith companies have bought and tried to integrate. I mean, are they? What's your view? Can they successfully integrate these things, or how do you feel about that?
I think it's happening very slowly, and even if they did, you still have the issue that's being talked about is you want best of breed for each tool. And just because the kind of a big VC happens to have bought several tools, it doesn't mean to say they've bought the best tool in each of these categories. So I actually think there's a third way that's probably more fruitful. And some of the tool vendors play, some don't. And that's using the APIs. So you can actually get tools to talk to each other, and you can extract the data from them. So rather than agencies or in-house teams building their own tools, they can use these best of breed tools, but suck the data out of them so they talk to each other, and so they do the things that you want them to do. And I think one of the big red flags for me when I'm evaluating tools is if they're unwilling to offer those API endpoints, because actually that shows that they're trying to lock you into kind of their ecosystem. They're actually trying to make it harder for you to kind of create that best of breed. And there are ways around it. You can scrape data from some of them, but actually if those vendors aren't willing to play and make your life easier, sometimes it might be worth looking to see what else is available there.
Yeah, well, in John's talk, she touched on the Barcelona principles, and of course, one of the Barcelona principles is that measurement evaluation should be transparent and replicable. And where a vendor is unwilling to play, as you described it, it's normally because there's some black box concept going on in their evaluation approach. So let's move on to talking about technology and measurement and evaluation. We've been talking about tools, right? We've been talking about technology and we're talking about it as a tool. But Jason, coming to you, can technology provide meaningful evaluation on its own? Does a tool provide meaningful evaluation?
I think that's a difficult question. I think, firstly, I think it's not an understatement to say that technology has really transformed our industry. It's been transformational. The type of data that we can get now is a world apart from when I first started working in the industry, and cuttings were cut out by scissors and so on. And what tech gives us, I think, is a fantastic way of crunching huge data sets. It allows us to do the heavy lifting. It gets the data quickly, and it categorizes it really well. I think data categorization by technology is really powerful. I think understanding that data, the inference of that data, and getting insights from that, I think is really challenging to do with technology. I think the way I think about this is technology is great for data, but insight is the interpretation of that data. And I think that only comes from a human understanding of how that data marries up to your organizational goals.
Yeah. So Louise, how do you go about getting insights from your data? Is that, I mean, talk us through the sort of evaluation approach Wildfire does with its clients in best practice cases. Well, you know, what's the way you think it works best?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about Jason's point, and the interpretation is critical. That's where the human kind of intervention comes in. I'd even take it back further to the start and say, actually, with the business objectives, what are we actually going to measure? Is it going to give you anything meaningful at the end of it? A lot of the briefs that we get, and I'm talking about big global tech brands, and you know, it's perhaps easier with the startups and the smaller businesses. They're a little bit more integrated in their approach. Brand awareness. Okay, well, we can tell you where your coverage has been, what the sentiment's like, maybe how many backlinks, give us access to your analytics, how many of those have actually delivered traffic back to your website. Is that brand awareness? I don't know. I don't think so. What does that brand awareness mean? There's a lot of call for media share of voice. Does that give me any indication that people are more or less aware of their brand? It really doesn't. So I think what I've seen happen in the last 3 to 5 years is the ways we can measure really expanding, which is good. I'm not there with my scalpel and my spray glue, but it's still not perfect, because the understanding from the client on what they're asking us for at the beginning, that's not being taken into account when we get through to the end result and the education process that's needed. Either it's a directive that they're getting from other parts of the business, or that's what they need to measure, but they just don't really know how to do that. And some of the tools there aren't able to give that in-depth insight.
Louise, I think you've hit on a really important point. I think it's too easy for the modern PR and comms pro getting data fired out of different tools to conflate impressions and share of voice with awareness, knowledge, and affinity. They're different things. And if you want to know if someone is aware, has knowledge of your product, your service, your offering, whatever it might be, you actually need to do the outtake measurement, as we talk about in the evaluation framework, which is a market research. And you can't use these output metrics as a proxy. So I think that's great points. Stu, coming to you. You know, Jason talked about a need for humans, and that technology can do the heavy lifting, you know, but could do so much, but that you need to enrich with humans. But where are humans in this whole process of technology, of these different tools? When I think about technology, well, someone's had to code it, as in code the software. And then if you think about it from a measurement point of view, you know, perhaps humans might want to enrich data, validate data that software might have decided is relevant or not relevant, etc. So what is the role of a human in this process?
I think it's kind of, there are kind of multiple levels. So first of all, when we talk about kind of, you know, somebody has to code it, somebody has to create these machine learning models, I think actually that's quite a critical part of where the human comes in, because we've all kind of seen the examples of things like, you know, depending on what data sample you use to create your model, you know, you can actually kind of create that bias at the start. So the model that you're creating is based on an imperfect world. So I think that's one of the areas where human comes in, is actually looking at the ethical dimensions of some of these tools and making sure that what we are creating are ones that are going to do the jobs that we actually want doing. But then I think the second part of it is picking up on something that kind of Jonah talked about in her presentation, about using this for future, and actually being able to take all of this kind of data that's being created and make sense of it to make better decisions. Now that's something that AI can help give you the framework to do it, but you're not necessarily going to want AI to make that decision for you. you might end up agreeing with what it's recommending, or you might disagree with it, but it's not making that decision. And I think that's the part that we need to be focusing on. I also think there's kind of, just going back to one of the things that that kind of Louise said, is there's also this huge danger of just having too much. I mean, Jonah showed that brilliant cartoon in her presentation with all those kind of lines on, and it kind of reminded me of one of the things where I often actually quote you, Richard, where I remember you speaking, I think it was at an AMEC summit years ago, where you were talking about chart porn. And it's a phrase that I kind of repeat, because you just summed it up perfectly. There was way too much of that. And that was years ago you talked about it, but it's actually got worse, not better. I think people don't heed our warnings.
Just because it looks pretty doesn't mean we should look at it, right, Stu? So, Louise, what about you at Wellfire and the sort of role of humans? Do you have people in-house who look at data points and write reports, or do you work with suppliers and you make sure that they do more than just have automation giving you your measurement and evaluation? How does that work at your agency?
I mean, again, it varies. I think in terms of, and depends on what the client's doing. So there is a certain element of, say we're using a monitoring tool and you're setting up Booleans. I mean, you could teach a lot of people about a lot of ways to put those things together, and I've got pages of them. There's people that understand how to do that and what that means in terms of getting the right kind of search terms out. So it's not something that everybody does. Some of the systems we're involved in, but they're managed by the client. That happens a lot, particularly with the global brands that we're working with. So we're a bit beholden to their system, where they go, well, this is what we're using. We're like, oh, it's not very good for Europe and the UK, but that's our standard tool. Okay, that's fine. I understand why. So there's a little bit of kind of conversation with them on adding different publications in, or websites, or just looking through the monthly reports that they provide, just to find any kind of anomalies there which don't quite fit with what we're seeing in the market over here. So it can become quite time intensive just to manage these different elements and actually just look at the data that's coming out, regardless of whether you're then going into the analysis of it, of what that actually means and how you should adapt your campaign as a result. So anything that makes that more accurate and easier and gives you more confidence to use that data is better, because the more time you can then spend on saying, right, I've got the confidence in that. What does it mean that we need to do? Where are we in our plan? Do we need to change this? Because going back to the objectives, what is this data supposed to be telling us in the first place? And that's where I'd like our teams to spend more of our time, because that's where the consultancy role comes in with the clients as well. Rather than just presenting them with information, I think Jonah touched on this in hers as well. Rather than just presenting reports, what are we going to do next as a result of the data that we have?
Yeah, and you've touched on a load of great points there. I mean, the time taken for data checking, making sure that what these tools are pumping out, whether it's relevant, the ethics behind the tools. When, you know, I think a lot of us know that a lot of content is going behind paywalls. It's becoming harder to find. A lot of these tools are just scraping stuff that's free and easy, and it's not necessarily content that matters. I mean, Jason, what thoughts have you got on sort of ethics of these tools, and what advice would you give to today's participants in terms of, you know, what they should be doing when they're thinking about, you know, particularly let's say they're running a big international, Louise talked about, you know, some of her big clients. What are the key things there to make sure they get it right?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of points. We've talked on ethics, you know, a little bit. There was a study recently by the CRPR, and they were looking at the use of AI in PR, and ethics was one of the big fears. Understanding impact on privacy, impacting on job losses because of the rise of automated copywriting and so on, were some big fears. So I think it's a very real challenge. In terms of advice around that, a lot of content is behind paywalls now, and automated tools don't necessarily access that. And I think sometimes with AI, there is a real risk of just measuring what's out there, measuring, you know, counting what's easy to count. And I think the important bit, it's our responsibility as practitioners to have our clients focusing on the content that really shifts perception and reputation. And a lot of that will be behind paywall and sometimes paywalls, and sometimes that means having humans go in and read that. And that is one of the risks of leveraging technology. There are shortcomings in terms of data access. So I would say don't try and count everything. Focus on the coverage that you know is going to shift perception, shift behavior, and focus on measuring that from an output perspective, but then also reinforce that by measuring audience outtakes and ultimately outcomes if you've got the data.
And we're talking here about AI, and a few of us are just bandying the term around, but I'm not sure that these tools are using AI in the way that people think they are, and I'm not sure that even we as a collective whole really understand it. So I'm going to come to Stu as the PR futurist. Stu, what is AI, and isn't half of the AI that's being talked about really just a marketing term, and actually it's just NLP? What is NLP for our listeners? What's the difference? Let's just establish those if you wouldn't mind for us.
I think, well, first up, it absolutely is being used as a marketing term by vendors. Just the sheer volume of kind of AI tools out there at the moment. And what's quite fascinating is that some of them had a previous life, i.e. they were launched as kind of something else, and then miraculously they've gained AI. Quite what they've gained, sometimes I would question. Now, realistically, what some of them are doing is using machine learning, which is a branch of AI. It is part of it. So basically, machine learning is using a kind of mathematical model to kind of look at that data and help the computer to learn without direct instruction. So, i.e., it is getting better over time. But that was one of the things I touched on earlier as well, about actually depending on that data you're pulling in is, when we say getting better, it is learning, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is getting better unless there is, and this is one of the places where humans can come in, you can kind of correct that learning and actually make up for some of the shortfalls in the data. So I think that's one of the challenges that we have out there. But also just look at what's happening with, probably in terms of AI, the big one at the moment is GPT-3. So that's the kind of the AI writing tool, which Microsoft has invested a huge amount in. And there are literally hundreds of startups out there offering kind of AI writing tools using the GPT-3 engine. And I've kind of played with quite a few of them. And to be fair, some of them are quite good. You can put in a bunch of keywords and it will write very convincing copy. But more interestingly, they will do things like uncovering insight. So I was using one of these tools with one of my clients, and it actually picked up on some issues which they'd been wondering about. So there were questions that people might ask about the organization. And when we'd kind of put the keywords into the AI tool, it was actually generating the questions. And then that kind of confirmed some of the thinking that they'd already started to do. I think one of the big challenges of using some of these tools is they aren't, because they kind of don't fit well. I mean, Louise talked about working for some of the big corporates and big enterprises. You can't use some of these tools if they're not meeting the kind of data compliance standards, the ethical standards, etc., that big corporates need. And there was a really interesting announcement earlier this month where Microsoft are incorporating GPT-3 into Azure and its kind of database. So actually all of those compliance standards that we need to be able to use will start to become available.
Okay. So we're running out of time, I just realized, which is very annoying because we could talk about this all day. But there is a further panel this afternoon run by my business partner, Mazen, which I'm sure will carry on with some great panelists on a lot of these topics. But Louise, I've got a question I want to come to you with. It's come from Simon in the audience, who's saying, what's the best way of monetizing investment in the PR tech stack when most clients expect good measurement as part of the ongoing account hygiene? So what?
Good question. One that I'm trying to crack as well. And this comes back to really my main bugbear with the whole measurement process, is that I don't think clients place enough importance and emphasis on measurement. They ask us to do a load of stuff, and they spend a lot of budget on it, but yet they seem less concerned about what's going to come out at the end, other than many that have a spreadsheet tracking number of pieces of coverage at the end. We have monetized to an extent, and therefore said, well, actually, we've got access to these tools for searches, media share of voice, if that's what you want, and then we charge them a monthly fee for that. And what we've started doing is really setting that out from the beginning when we're engaging with them in the pitch process. So there's a certain amount we can present as part of the insights work that we do and understanding their business. But okay, you'll get a list of the work that we do. We'll analyze this. We'll maybe do kind of quarterly or yearly reports and evaluations. But if you want ongoing tracking, then we've started to look at how we build that in and then charge on a monthly basis. It's not a huge amount, but it gives us the money back for us to be able to pay for those platforms. We run quite a lot, because I think that while there's feature creep, we need all of them. So yeah, we have been looking at that, and I don't think it needs to be something you charge a lot for.
I think for an agency, it needs to be about having the confidence, doesn't it, to have this conversation up front and say we need to have it to do a meaningful job. Anyway, and to your point as well, John was saying that there was a measurement month session yesterday and with CARMA. It's available to watch on demand. Again, it was a brilliant session. It had Erica Harris from HSBC talking about this. Erica's in charge of their global measurement program. And Erica was making the point that she found it incredible that the PR and comms function was spending all of this money on all of these different initiatives, and then was like, oh, well, hold on, we're going to spend some money on seeing whether it was effective or not, and her point was, of course we need to know whether it is effective or not. Now we are basically out of time, so I'm going to just quick fire come to each of you, seeing as it's my son's lined up with his advent calendars ready to go from tomorrow, so it's the season to feel jolly. Christmas is coming. What are you hoping for your measurement Christmas present? So Louise, let's come to you first. What could Santa bring you for your
I don't know if I'm that jolly though. I mean, mine is just the frustration of, I wish next year that the clients will take it more seriously. There's so much work being done on tools. There's so much that we're trying to do as an industry to prove our value and our worth. And clients need to be on that journey with us. And I really wish that they would, it's not just about investment, but it's investment of their thought process as well, that they're really working with us to prove the value of what they're putting budget behind. That would be ideal if that would happen in a year, and I'd be hitting this time next year saying that we'd achieved that, but at least starting to make some inroads on that journey.
And so say all of us. Jason, what about you?
I think if the fat man came down my chimney, I think he would bring me a gift of communications evaluation rather than just media analysis. So I think one of the things that we're missing is integrating third-party data. We're too focused as an industry on measuring outputs, when what we should be doing is having a look at how those outputs impact on perception changes, behavioral shifts, and using more data sets to demonstrate that. So that would be my wish.
And a fine wish that is too. Thank you. And Stu, what about you?
Well, my Christmas measurement wish from Santa is that we stop obsessing over using measurement to focus on proving how clever we are and what results we've achieved. I want us to use measurement for insight and to actually help us to improve what we do. Because guess what? If we focus on insight and doing everything better, those results at the end are going to be better anyway. There's too much emphasis on proving how clever we are instead of being cleverer.
I think that's right. And I think, look, at the end of the day, guys, we're all on a journey. No one's got all of this stuff completely cracked. We've talked a lot about technology. We've kept talking about tools. There's been a lot of questions in the chat about different tools. I would stress to everybody that this is about, if you want to measure your comms, it's about more than just a tool. A tool is going to count what is easy to count. If you want to prove your value, if you want to get insights to be more effective, to change your strategic direction, et cetera, it's about more than a tool. A tool is a part of your armory, but it's not the end point. So please, as we think about technology, as we talk about digital PR later today, we've got a great keynote coming up. Let's just remember that tools have their place more than ever in this pandemic era that we live in, of uncertainty, budget pressures on all organizations. As PR and comms pros, we have to show our value, and that's about not just being busy fools counting stuff. It's about really demonstrating what it is that we've achieved. So on that note, I will hand over to Corey at the PRCA, and I'll thank my panelists, Louise Palmer, Stuart Bruce, Jason Weeks, very much for their time and their insights they shared with us. Thank everyone who's joined today as well, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the session. Thank you, guys. Corey.
Thank you very much for that, Richard, and yes, thank you, Stuart, Louise, and Jason for that excellent session on the rise of technology. Hi everyone, my name is Koray Kamgoz. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing at the PRCA, and I have the pleasure of being your host for the rest of this year's measurement conference. So we have one more session to go before our break, so we'll go straight to it. To present on the measurement of cross-channel campaigns, I'd like to introduce Will Hobson. Will is PR and London Director at Rise at 7. He has over 8 years of experience in digital PR, working on clients such as Misguided, Pretty Little Thing, and IG. From finance to fashion, Will often thinks of himself as digital's answer to Patsy and Eddie, which is a brilliant bio if I've ever heard one.
Thank you so much, Carl.
Please remember to post your questions throughout the session. You can use the chat function here. Do also remember to join in on social. We're using the hashtag PRCA Measurement Conf. And I will be rejoining Will in just a moment to pose a few of your questions to him with the time we have remaining. So with that in mind, Will, I will hand over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm super excited for this. I'm going to try and share my screen and hopefully it works. I think it is, but please let me know if it's not. I'm just going to move this. Just move this too. Move everyone out the way. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited. So just to kind of give a little bit of an intro to who even am I and what do I do? First of all, starting with a great GIF for myself. I am quite fond of the old GIF. But just to give you a little bit of background. So as Corey kind of mentioned, I've been working in digital PR for just over 8 years. Prior to that, I was working in kind of more traditional PR, a few consumer agencies, as well as a few different charities. I think one of my favorite things about working in the industry is just the breadth of different topics and clients that I've been able to work on. So like I said, everything from fashion to finance. I think one of the biggest important things from digital PR that I've learned, and especially working at Rise at 7, is we really want to make sure we've got a strong story and we're really story first as an agency, making sure that with press, we're really giving them what they want and understanding what they want. And from a PR point of view, really getting to grips with that. So a little bit what you might be able to ask me about after the talk. So everything that I love talking about is reactive PR, financial PR, fashion PR, celebrity PR, PR in general. I absolutely love PR. I thought of myself, I think I watched too much Sex and the City as a kid, so thought I was going to be Samantha Jones. It's not just quite like that, but I'm still having a good time. And then also Whispering Angel or RuPaul's Drag Race if you want to talk about things less PR focused. You can find me at Will Hobson on Twitter, so happy to answer any questions or anything that you weren't quite sure of throughout the talk. So just to kind of go over a little bit about Rise at 7. So we're a search first creative agency, and the agency that brands come to for speed, results, and something a little bit exciting. And the reason Rise at 7 was created is we spotted a bit of a gap in the market in terms of people were absolutely amazing at search, but people were also amazing at traditional PR and brand, but no one was necessarily tying that together. So what we want to do at Rise at 7 is help build brands through our digital PR and traditional PR tactics, but also have an impact from a search point of view, because the more that you build your brand, the more that Google's going to take notice of you, is what we believe. So what we want to do is we want to get people to search for your brand or products, such as Nando's, or help you come up for when they don't. So we kind of want to have that much of an impact that Google's going to have to take notice to you. just going into kind of the current state of the industry, and something that I've been kind of quite passionate about over the past 2 years. Well, ever since I started working in PR, really, was that reactive PR element and being able to jump on trends and anything that's happening. So over the past 18 months, mainly due to the pandemic, reactive strategies have become more common. I remember back in March 2020, when everything was going absolutely kind of wild with the pandemic, we noticed that obviously we usually plan our campaigns 6 to 12 months in advance. We had to totally shelve that and take kind of everything out of the window in terms of our planned campaigns and create really reactive strategies. And the reason we're able to do that is because the news agenda was changing so much. We had to change with it. And because we were able to do that, we have to have some amazing campaigns that followed that reactive strategy. So what we've been able to do at Rise 7 is build out a reactive team that are dedicated to all sorts of different industries. So everything from kind of finance to fashion to travel, automotive, beauty. We've got everyone ready to jump on any trending moment. And a lot of that comes with popular culture. So whether that's when Adele's album comes out, like what eyeliner is she wearing? What nail polish is she wearing on her ITV show? Like, we're ready to absolutely analyze everything, even to the point of like Marvel film releases. So we work with a few educational brands, and basically from the latest Eternals Marvel movie, one of the actors is actually deaf and uses sign language throughout it. So we're ready to kind of jump on any sort of trending subject and how that can be kind of relevant and put our brands at those conversations. So over the past 12 months specifically, we've had to adapt to that and create these really cool reactive strategies. And that's something that we do kind of day in, day out. So with that team that we've created, what we're able to do is kind of every morning, we're analyzing all sorts of different news channels, social channels, business live blogs, even down to Google Analytics, and what is happening on our client sites that we can react to from a media point of view and make relevant. But we also have to evaluate that as well as some of our larger campaigns. So what we tend to do is going on to kind of the cross-channel type of pieces that we work on. We work on campaigns called what we call unicorn campaigns. And what they are cross-channel campaigns. They're for PR purposes. So they're to build media coverage, they're to build kind of links back from a search point of view. But we also want to have cross-channel kind of amplifications. So that could be anything that's what we call micro content. It could be anything across social. It could be across Reddit threads. It could be TikTok. It could be GIFs. It could be even out-of-home billboards. Like, it could be literally anything. But what we tend to start off with is that unicorn content that will then be there for PR purposes. Amplify that through micro content, and then distribute that across multiple channels, PR being one of those channels, as well as like social, depending on the idea. But after that, we want to really understand how have our campaigns performed and how can we learn from that, but also like how do we actually show our value more than just necessarily press coverage and everywhere that we've landed links in. We want to make sure that our links are working a little bit harder and we're actually showing extra little bits that we're able to add to it too. So before I go into kind of how we actually evaluate those campaigns, I thought it'd be good to just touch upon what is digital PR and what is it there for. So back in 2014, when I actually first started in the industry, a lot of brands used to pay for links back to their site. And then Google actually started penalizing brands for doing this. So they released an algorithm called Penguin, where they would basically absolutely kind of hammer anyone that was doing anything paid for. So brands started to engage in a different form of acquiring links through content marketing and digital PR. And that's where a lot of agencies brought in people like myself who had that PR experience, but had never really necessarily done it from an SEO purpose, and to actually teach them how to build links. So just giving a bit of a definition of what digital PR is. So digital PR is creating stories or content that journalists and users naturally want to talk about, link to, because it's awesome, resourceful, useful, or different. It's using content marketing to build a strong backlink profile for a website. So it's about creating cool stories, basically, is what we want to do, that are awesome, resourceful, useful, or a little bit different, or a little bit out there. So I'll go over the kind of main digital PR strategies we utilize and how we can evaluate that in different ways. So similar to what I've done before in traditional PR, we'll be able to kind of utilize different strategies at different times depending on what brands. But I'll quickly go over the kind of main 5 that we use. So for a lot of our fashion and beauty brands that we work with, we do a lot of product PR. And that isn't necessarily just saying, okay, here's a dress that we're working on. It's looking a little bit further. So it works perfectly for, like I said, fashion, lifestyle brands, but it can be utilized across multiple industries. But what we want to do is, with this product PR element, we want to create a story out of it. So I've got a few case studies that I'll take you through a little bit further in the deck that actually shows this kind of coming into action. But product PR, it's still there to tell a story. It's still there to help sell your products. And I think this is really useful to evaluate that campaign, because you can literally show what you've done. So we work with a lot of fashion brands at the moment, and obviously, as the guys mentioned on the panel, in terms of advent calendars being huge in December, we've been going advent calendar wild, pushing everything from dog advent calendars to beauty advent calendars, and obviously in a lot of roundup pieces within the press. But those advent calendars, we still create a strong story out of them, because the pet one, no one had necessarily done a massive pet advent calendar. So the strong story for us there was that, like, one of these fashion brands has launched the first ever pet advent calendar, and given those different options. So with product PR, we aren't just relaying something that's already there, we're actually creating an interesting story out of it. And that's the same with the next tactic of reactive PR. We want to jump on a trend that we've seen. So for example, things that we've done in the past is, we work with a few different sneaker brands, and we saw that Crocs were having a bit of a resurgence at the beginning of the year. And with reactive PR, we want to jump on that trend from popular culture. So when we saw Crocs resurging, we basically saw that if people were basically searching it on our client site, people were looking for Crocs, but the demand was there. But then Nicki Minaj, like, absolutely sent Instagram wild, because she posted a picture in the pair of pink Crocs, and then people were then going on our client site searching for pink Crocs. We can then take that stat just as a percentage, not giving anything away necessarily that was sensitive, and able to release that as a quick press release to be like, Crocs are resurging, demand's up by 7,000%, says X in terms of our client. And that is basically us jumping on a reactive popular culture moment and putting our client really at the center of it to help build their brand relevance. So that's another tactic that you can use. Data-led digital PR campaigns. So utilizing data to create an interesting story and press pickup. We usually include imagery and graphics in there. So a lot of the time that can be open data. So we kind of work closely with our data team. I know one of our data guys is on a panel with you guys later, and then he'll be talking through a few different ways that we do that. But our data team would gather open data sources, anything from like ONS, and analyze a certain topic. So, and then we would tend to have content on site that we would kind of build press mentions and links back to, be creating different fun ways. The kind of fourth strategy that we would use would be news jacking, and that's really, really similar to that reactive PR, but we tend to kind of hold news jacking for more of our financial led clients. So again, jumping on current news events and offering commentary from expert spokespeople. So we work with a lot of CFD and Forex traders, and what we tend to do is, say, for example, there's a stock market movement, crypto dips, something happens in the FTSE 100, we'll basically put an expert comment out from a few of our kind of analysts, just kind of giving a bit more of an opinion, asking what kind of that can lead to and what it might mean for the market, etc. And it can be super successful for building not only brand fame, but also kind of, especially from Google's eyes, they love expertise, authority, and trust. And that's something that we're constantly trying to build, just to make sure that your brand's seen as a trusted brand. And this exercise can be really, really successful for that. And what we would look to for this type of thing after is measuring, like, are we in publications that we wanted to be in versus like our dream list thing. And then lastly, it would be creative or unicorn campaigns, as we call them. So these are campaigns that usually involving a larger creative execution or interactivity, something that can be cross-channel, so it can be multiplied across social, could be out of home, like I mentioned earlier, totally depends on what the idea is. Cool. So I'm just going to talk through a few different case studies that have a real strong, the reason I want to put them in there is because we're looking at things that aren't just just press mentions, basically. They all have one thing in common. So I'm going to talk through, first of all, Misguided with this matching dog jumpers. So we worked with Misguided over about 12 months ago. They came to us during 2019 Christmas and basically said, look, we've got these Christmas jumpers. We've got some ones for dogs, one for adults, and they look amazing. There was a bit of a trend at the time of matching dog and owner jumpers. And it was like H&M had just released it. So we were like, well, look, this jumper is perfect for that roll neck version you just showed us on site. So let's package it up as a story and be like, you can now buy matching dog and owner jumpers for this Christmas. Roll necks are perfect this time of year. They always come back. So we pushed it as a press story and it achieved like huge results that we never thought. So launched on the likes of Tyler, like all the lifestyle nationals, as well as like a few different publications around the world, like People magazine in the US for the US strategy. And what we actually wanted to do with this, so we'd got that amazing coverage, we'd got everywhere we wanted to get in terms of that, but we wanted to actually show a little bit more than necessarily just that press coverage. We wanted to, first of all, sell out the product. So the product did sell out. So after that, we then basically brought more ranges in. So we did everything from dog loungewear, we did literally dog and owner, everything that you can imagine on from all different lines. But again, we wanted to show more than necessarily just revenue. We want to show that long-lasting kind of impact that you can have from this type of activity. So alongside that link building digital PR side of things that we did, we also did kind of social influencer marketing. So worked with a few different influencers to gift them and their dogs so they could push that out over social to generate sales, as well as actually creating different content pieces around dog jumpers and dog guides so that we could basically, for a certain amount of time, rank in position 1 for dog jumpers. And what I love about this story in itself is the average monthly search volume for dog jumpers before we ran all our different campaigns and activity was about 20,000 searches per month on Google. After this activity, over the course of about 3 to 4 months, it was actually doubled to 40,000 searches per month. So this type of campaign can show more than just necessarily sales, more than necessary press and links. It's actually showing a shift in what people are looking for and a shift in trend. So we can prove that through just showing the kind of monthly search increase, and whether that's pulled from search metrics or a few different tools that we're able to utilize as well. So again, looking a little bit further than just necessary media coverage and links that we want to talk about. Ricky Easter egg surprise. So this was a really fun campaign we ran a few Easters ago where we basically created a sex toy, and well, the world's first Easter egg with a sex toy inside. We wanted to hit roundups, but the most important thing for this is because it was a new business, they wanted, again, different evaluation tactics. So they basically wanted to increase their email sign up. So we launched this campaign with a product page with a certain amount of limited stock, so about 100 Easter eggs. And then we had basically, once it was sold out, because it hit all sorts of different publications, like in their Easter egg roundups, all the lifestyle publications we wanted. We got an amazing amount of revenue through kind of selling the product as well. But he wanted to hit that goal of email address sign up. So we put a sold out, obviously once it's sold out logo on, and then for when it comes back in stock, your email address with obviously like what you're signing up to, this is what you're doing. And we were able to get over 10,000 email addresses from that. So again, finding something different as an evaluation to show of how we're necessarily building his email marketing database so we can remarket to those customers as well. So something a little bit different to go for. This campaign that we did for Game is one of my favorites. So Luke and the team here in our campaigns team run this, and it's absolutely amazing. So during the launch of PS5, Game came to us in partnership with PlayStation and wanted a bit of a campaign that was going to create not only press coverage, but social shares. It was going to be a social first campaign, but also drive revenue. So the PS5 had totally sold out. You couldn't buy it literally anywhere. So we wanted to create a campaign where we would hide the PS5 and the PlayStation shapes on the Game website as a bit of like an Easter egg hunt, similar to what you would do in a game where they leave clues. And we'd launch a social competition that would give you clues to where those shapes were. If you were to find the shapes, you would be in with the chance of winning a PS5. And when we launched this at like key points during the run up to like as the PS5 had released, We've got over 51 media placements, so all the gaming publications, all the UK nationals. But I think the most interesting part that we looked at is the amount of traffic that we drove to site. So over 320,000 visits, as well as social impressions of our social campaign, as well as assisted conversions. So once people had jumped onto the game site, they'd then gone to other site, other areas of the site, and then bought something. So we can actually attribute through Google Analytics this revenue to our campaign, and say, obviously, through this is what was assisted. So the campaign proves that you almost pay for it yourself. So looking for different ways to show worth through our campaign. So like I said, revenue, traffic, as I mentioned earlier, email sign up. So we tend to work with our clients and understand their goals first and try and make sure our campaigns can suffice those, and then also prove that at the end and show where it did and where it didn't hit what we wanted it to do. Lastly, for the campaign that we'll talk through is the next dog model that we did for Kath Kidson. So this was a social and digital PR campaign to find Kath Kidson their next dog model. So we launched it with a bit of a social competition to be like, you can now get your dog to star in Kath Kidson's next product launch. It went wild over social. We had over 14,000 applications, as well as over 159 publications that we're talking about. So again, all the press, pet press that we want to go to, as well as a few different kind of nationals to promote their latest pet collection, which was perfect. And I think with this one particularly, we're looking at that social side of things. So the amount of kind of social traffic that we've driven, the amount of kind of applications, as well as we can then track things like increases in followers, increases in engagement rates and things. So loads of different tactics that we can utilize to improve and evaluate what we've done. So all these campaigns have one thing in common. We measured more than just press coverage and links through this work. But what did we evaluate? So what do we tend to show our clients? So we've built a measurement strategy at Rise at 7 that looks into these 5 things. So we want to look at awareness. So how aware are people of your brand? How does this compare to competitors? Influence, how much traffic is reaching the site through which channels and devices? Action, how do your users engage with content? What action do users take to show intriguing products or services? And results, how are users converting from prospects to customers? What is the final goal? And then value, how much value do conversions bring? What drives the most revenue for you as a business? So evaluating the cross-channel campaigns, we want to look at obviously media coverage and links. So how many publications have covered and linked back to your content, but also traffic, as I mentioned, like how much traffic has been driven to your site or your PR campaign. And it doesn't necessarily just need to be things that are online. For example, one of our clients just yesterday was featured on This Morning. And when they were featured on This Morning about a certain product, we noticed how much traffic was going to site from that This Morning placement. So we're able to actually see and correlate due to that time using Google Analytics, how much traffic was driven, but also how much revenue at that time. So then we can literally attribute that to a feature on This Morning. So that then we can use that to go back and say, well, actually, what our goal is for this campaign is to get it on This Morning first, then follow up with this campaign. And it helps inform our strategy in the long term to make sure we're listening to what worked and what didn't. Assisted conversion. So if you have access to your brand's GA, you'll be able to track you based on your campaign activity. If people have touched on your campaign, then gone on to buy something from elsewhere on site. We also want to look at social shares. So how much is your campaign being shared on social, but also the shares of the article you've had featured in. So how many times has that article shared? So going back to that misguided piece that we did on dog jumpers, when we launched that campaign, we launched it with Tyler. So lifestyle publication has massive engagement on social. So they've got over like 50 million followers that they have on like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And we saw that basically a lot of people were then coming through their Facebook post. There was over 27,000 comments on it of their Facebook post of our article that they published, and going through and then buying the product. So we know that we want to get on Tyler, and we know that that helps not necessarily just from a PR point of view, but also from a business revenue point of view. So you can track that using a few different tools. Brand health. So if you're able to track brand health, has there been any movements around your campaign launches? So trying to correlate launch dates to any kind of spikes or troughs in your brand health. So, but you need to think further than just these metrics still. We need to build a brand. So going back to what I mentioned at the beginning, at Rise at 7, we want to build brand authority. We want to help build a brand to the point that Google's going to take notice of it. So we want to be able to build brand through our activity. So when we're landing press coverage, we want to actually, and links back to our content or our site, we want to drive links that actually get clicked on. So something that we've built for a few different of our clients is this index, which basically shows the publications that we've been featured on, all pulling through Google Analytics. The domain authority of that site isn't necessarily be all and end all, but just shows you the level of how big the site is and the quality of it. How many people have passed through and bought something, what traffic that site has driven to our site, how many social shares has it got, and then how many times have we been featured on that site. And as you can see, as I've mentioned Tyler earlier, Tyler isn't necessarily the biggest site, it's not necessarily the biggest publication, but for the brand we're working on, this is an example of Misguided, we know that Tyler is where their audience is, because every time we land on Tyler, people go through and buy something, people drive a lot of traffic to the site, people are actually interested in what that is. So we know that Tyler is perfect for our audience. Like I said, not necessarily the biggest site, but the biggest site that's driving more than just coverage. It's actually driving sales, it's actually driving social shares, it's actually driving engagement. Tools that you can use to evaluate campaigns on site. So a few different things that we use within our evaluation kind of methods. BuzzSumo. So BuzzSumo is amazing to show you the most shared for content online. And you can also look at kind of links back to certain pages on site within your campaigns and different things really. So we utilize it a lot during our ideation process, but also evaluation, just to show, okay, how many times has that article been shared? Is it the most shared for content for that journalist? So it can be a really useful tool. Ahrefs, so good for competitor and content research, everything from backlinks to keywords. I often utilize Ahrefs mainly for a competitor analysis, but within this evaluation period, it's just to make sure you know how many people are linking to your site, and also like, have you missed any that you wouldn't necessarily find by just looking on Google or reading in the press? And then GA is a really important one. So great for assessing the impact of your campaigns, especially from that revenue point of view, traffic point of view, finding out what publications engage with what, which one is the most engaged, and that can help you learn for the future so that you can understand where to launch with your next campaign. Is it that actually Tyler's the best one, or is it going to be the Daily Mail, or is it going to be XYZ that actually drove the most for us, so we know that we want to feature on there, and that's the relationships that we want to build. So it can just help you, give you a little bit of insight into that. Offsite, some more traditional ways of evaluation. So whether it's a media monitoring service, coverage books, amazing to automate it. And then also just social. Like one of the things that I use over social mainly is, say, for example, what's happening a lot recently is because we're jumping on a lot of popular culture moments. So specifically with our reactive strategies, we'll notice we might get kind of shares from certain influencers or certain celebrities. And that's amazing to kind of add in your evaluation point, because getting shared by someone from a huge Marvel film who's also got 5 million X followers is an amazing kind of extra bow to your almost campaign. So just making sure you're doing a constant search over social and social listening tools that you might have, just to see, is there a different way that you might be able to evaluate it more than just necessarily the normal ways that we would. Driving business impact and revenue. So there's extra pieces that I mentioned a bit earlier with our kind of Ricky case study. So looking at extra things such as email signups, is there a way that you could get through your campaign a lot more email signups, a lot more app downloads, a lot more kind of more retail retail brands are looking to drive a lot of sales through their app. So it might be a campaign that you can kind of divert so that you can actually track how many app downloads have been done because of X, Y that you've kind of had. So a good different extra way to evaluate your campaign. Sales, so like I mentioned earlier with kind of GA, making sure that if you've had assisted conversions or assisted revenue that's come through from sales, or that you've actually done a bit of a PR product and the product has just sold out. And we've done a few different product PR stories where the product has literally sold out. So we're able to go into Google Analytics, look at the revenue that's came over that certain period of time and correlate that towards the campaign. Have you had an impact on keyword rankings and visibility? So if you do track keyword rankings of your brand, have they increased, or has the overall visibility of the site increased since you kind of launched your campaign? So again, pinpointing key moments of launching a campaign and when that actually necessarily see if you can correlate it to your campaign, basically. Journalist metrics, so have social shares of an article written by your campaign gone through the roof? that's always a good one to basically see if that's actually smashed it for that journalist. And if you've got a really good relationship with them, that can help build that relationship if you're giving those little tips to them and that insight of data. Dream publication secured. So something that we do at Rise at 7, especially from not only our point of view, but also from a brand's point of view, when we start working with someone, we ask, is there a dream publication that you'd like to be featured on? Is there something that we like where you want to be versus where we want you to be as well? And we use that as almost like a dream list tick off, so that we can go through and be like, look, we featured on these XY publications that were absolutely, and that's more necessarily a vanity metric than it is necessarily something that you can back up with data. It's more, where do you want to be featured on, why? Cool. So a bit of a top tip, give a journalist the pat on the back they deserve. So if you've launched a campaign and you've necessarily noticed that there's a certain article, so for me, for Misguided, it would be that Tyler article that I've mentioned. I know that it drives so much traffic to our site. I know that it drives so much sales. I'm going to tell the journalist that, and I'm going to tell them that to help build my relationship with them, just so that they can know that actually this is what your work's done, because they've got their own KPIs to adhere to in terms of like amount of traffic to their campaign. So it will just help build that relationship. You're giving them that extra insight. And as mentioned earlier, with a few different campaigns that we've worked on, celebrities and influencers have shared our articles and shared those publications, pieces that have written from our clients' brands. So we want to make sure that we're able to share that with the journalists, give it them, because they might not necessarily have seen that. So just again, helps to build your relationship personally with them. Evaluating brand health is something that we want to do as well, just so we can actually see, are we having an impact through our campaigns and what we do. So we use YouGov Brand Index for our brand health tools. So a tool that helps us continuously measure the public's perception of the brands we work with, using daily syndicated surveys to over kind of 1 million Brits to track 4,000 brands across 16 metrics, proving and measuring the impact of brand-led strategies along the way. Focusing on household brands with 15% nat rep awareness or more. And what we can basically do this is we look at 3 different metrics. So media metrics, like has there been anything in the press that's going to have an impact on them? Have you heard anything positive or negative? Brand health metrics, so it's kind of understanding the quality of the brand. Does the brand offer kind of good or bad value for money? And then kind of the purchase consideration intent, so are you likely to purchase with that brand? And it's good, especially for the fashion brands that we work with, so we can pinpoint not only our campaigns but also things that have happened in the media and things that have happened with them and the brand, and seeing if that's affecting the customer's kind of consideration to purchase and intent. So giving a few examples. So again, when we've worked for Misguided, they basically wanted to see the kind of measure the impact of missed moments. So we were kind of looking at Love Island and seeing if it had kind of a bit of an impact either negatively or positively on the brand when we were looking at Love Island and Misguided together. So we could kind of, they've in the past run a few of their adverts, so we could actually see if the ad awareness versus actually Misguided as a brand, see if it had an impact on that. And we can also track the impact of news. So for example, when the whole M&S versus Audi debate was going on, we wanted to basically look for kind of Colin the Caterpillar and Cuthbert the Caterpillar, see if that had an impact on brands. So we could see that news sentiment, purchase consideration was actually up for Audi, and that was amazing, versus M&S, where it was actually down, where we could show that actually because of the impact of the news, Audi actually came out of this fighting. So it's really good for us to just analyze that for our brands. This is an example of what we've done for kind of Pretty Little Thing and Misguided, and actually seeing how whether a certain news moment has a positive or negative impact on the brand and what that actually did, but also longer term. So for example, basically we launched our dog jumper campaign piece, and as you can see, correlating that to Misguided's £1 bikini, we actually had a bigger positive impact with our matching dog jumper piece versus their £1 bikini, which received a lot of negative press. So we can kind of pinpoint those moments and see what impact it's had on the brand. And finally, kind of learning from your mistakes is something that I'm a massive believer of. And what to include in your campaign reviews and your evaluation can really kind of show that, and isn't necessarily something you want to ignore or forget. Like for me, learnings are a big thing. So within all our campaign reviews, we're also looking at the positive things that we've driven, the impact that we've had, the business revenue, email stats, anything that's going to bring you those extra positive moments, but also what have we learned and how are we going to learn from it? So if your campaign campaign did work? Why did it work? Was there a certain time that you launched? Was there a certain thing that you were looking at? When did it do? So making sure that you're writing down all the learnings from the campaign, that you've been really honest about it, and kind of making sure that's all written down. Make sure that everyone knows that. So what we do at the end of every campaign is do a wash up with the whole team, so that everyone can be understand the pointers of what worked well, what didn't. Then also, like, thinking longer term, record which formats have worked the best over time. So make sure you can track the campaign by campaign, which type of campaign has performed best. So thinking of those strategies that I mentioned earlier, is there a certain one that's performed better than another over a certain amount of time? Is there a reason for that? How are you going to learn from that? And in the future, just focus on X campaign at a certain time. It could be, there's loads of different factors that kind of result in it. Then looking at the seeding plan. So analyze your seeding plan. What articles caused the most traction in terms of like which ones drove the most traffic, which ones drove the most kind of assisted revenue and assisted conversion. So then you can understand the causation and like, actually, can you learn from that for the future? So thinking of Misguided, we want to be featured in Tyler, not all the time, but quite often with some of our campaigns when we want to push product because we know it sells. So certain things like that you can learn from over the course of the time. And you can do that year on year. Like we reran a campaign in the past, and we basically just went back, and it was like 5 years after the campaign. We went back to where the first article was published and the most shared for article, and found out it was a marketing publication. So we were like, okay, let's target that with a launch strategy, and then it then started that same wave of kind of virality, as we should say. And then that lastly leads on to record the time of launch. So make sure the month and day of your launch of the campaign is recorded. It's not the be all and end all. I think it's a big PR myth to like launch on a certain day or a certain time, but it does help, obviously, mainly with seasonality, but also just to try, again, have that data over time so you can see if there is any correlation, see if there is anything that you could necessarily learn from. Amazing. I do talk so fast, so I've probably whittled through this in like no business time. So key takeaways. What I necessarily want you guys to take away from this talk would be to look for more than just press coverage. Can you show impact to business revenue? Can you show impact to something that's super important to the business? How can you show extra value? Make sure journalists know the impact of their work with you. Make sure that you tell them stats that you've got, you tell them extra pieces that, even if it's like feedback from the client, like that caused us X. Like, for example, when we did our misguided dog jumpers piece, I was always in touch with the journalists, like, oh my God, it's on in their office. They have like screens with like what's hot that day and what's selling the most. So I was like, the jumper's on all day because of you guys, like, and it just helps build your relationships with them, really. Make sure you're learning from your past successes and failures, and make sure they're recorded. Make sure that you aren't necessarily just forgetting it and caught too much up in the whirlwind of PR as it is, but you're actually looking back over time and reassessing and reevaluating and learning from that for the future. Amazing. I have gone so fast, but that is it. So I'm really looking forward to any questions or anything that anyone has as well. I want to open up the floor.
Will, thank you so much for that. That was fascinating, and we've had plenty of comments coming in the chat box which have reiterated that. So thank you very much for sharing that. I think
no problem.
Your results really speak for themselves, and it's incredible to really get to grips with the approach you've taken, and also see how it's driving the bottom line results as well. We have had quite a few questions come in. We are running a little bit behind on our original schedule, so I'm just going to pick out one, and then perhaps
no problem.
I'll give you another chance to share your contact details and your socials so people can get in touch with you if they'd like to contact you directly. But there was one just that came through fairly early on from Max Dealey, and he asked, how do you encourage backlinks on publication sites? And are there any top tips that you can share with our attendees today?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is probably one of the best things to point out, is making sure that you've always got something on site to link back to. So for us, we're never necessarily just point blank asking like, I want a link, blah, 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 here from a journalist. It's encouraging them to link back. So in terms of all our campaigns, there's always something on site to link back to. So whether that's content, whether that's a data source, whether that's an interactive asset. So you've always got to make sure that within your outreach email and how you're outreaching journalists, that there are almost necessarily no reason not to link back. So it's always that encouragement. So making sure you've got on-site content, making sure that the way that you position it, a lot of the time we'll always kind of necessarily, to say it's coming from a brand, we wouldn't necessarily like link at the brand name. We'd call it, so say we've done a data story, I mentioned one of those tactics, we'd look at like a study by X. So it's kind of always linking back to that piece. So encouraging it as much as possible and making sure you've got on-site content is probably the most important things.
Great, thank you. Quick time for another one from Mia Co-Train. She asked, really interesting presentation, Will. Do you have any recommendations for more cost-effective brand health evaluation methods? She says that YouGov surveys and the like are great, but they can be quite expensive.
Yeah, so I think things that we've done in the past is social listening. So I think that's going to be instantly. So even if it's like a free tool that you can go to, you're at least going to be able to touch into who's talking about your brand compared to other brands. If you go on BuzzSumo as well, you can also compare based on kind of like what publications are talking about what. So looking at a few different keywords. They also have a free option. So social listening, but also probably we've utilized a few different things with like customer surveys as well. So if you have working with a brand that has a big email database, that you're able to ask certain questions within your kind of customer email database and customer kind of surveys to get their brand health that way. So probably looking at things on a smaller scale, but there is a few different ways that you could kind of tap into free resources, whether like I said, social email database that you might already existingly have, or free for free for tools, should I say. Ooh.
So yeah, last question actually, because we've still got a minute, and this one's actually from me, so I'm jumping the queue. I'll admit on that. You mentioned you focus quite heavily on how to build a reactive strategy.
Yeah.
And what would you say is the most important? What's the most important piece of advice you could give to a communications professional who's really tasked with doing that? And is it the case that it's having the right people in place, or what? From your point of view, what's the key to getting that reactive strategy right?
Reactive strategies, they aren't for everyone. I think you have to be fast. You have to, so say, for example, I'll use an example of the Met Gala for a fashion brand that we're working on. Not the Met Gala, so the MTV Awards was on the Sunday and the Met Gala was on the Tuesday. Reactive has to be so fast because the MTV Awards they're only relevant for like 2 days, and the Met Gala just comes and wipes that out. So it's like, if you're then working with a client that would necessarily take days to sign off, it's just not going to work. So you need to be quite honest up front and be like, look, this is how the strategy works. We're going to need speed. We're going to need relevance. We're going to need to keep it simple. So I think one of the things that I notice a lot with a few reactive strategies when I'm teaching our team internally is that people often try and turn it into a full campaign. It's like, well, if you're pulling data, if you're doing X, Y, Z, it's not a reactive strategy. It needs to be a comment or a stat or something that's fast. So speed is the most important with that reactive strategy, I would say. So, but also don't get disheartened if it doesn't work the first time, because it can be one of those that it's not the be all and end all, because you've not spent hundreds of thousands of pounds or whatever building X, Y, Z. You've actually just spent an hour writing a comment and it hasn't landed. So just going back to like what I said with that evaluation strategy, understanding why it hasn't landed. Is it because it's not interesting enough? Have I missed the mark? Have I not given it? And a lot of the time, thinking in finance, it depends what industry is, but within the finance industry, a lot of analyst comments and things like that, they tend to not get coverage because they haven't given an opinion, because sometimes brands are scared to give an opinion, but you have to give a little bit more than just what's happened in the story. Otherwise the journalist's like, yeah, I know that. They don't want you to give a little bit more. So yeah, I think speed's the biggest thing though. So like, if you're going to take a week to sign something off, it's probably not for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Will, thank you so much for your presentation. It was absolutely fascinating. And
no problem.
As I said, we've had plenty of positive feedback in the chat. So thanks very much. Where can people go to find you on social if they like to?
Yeah, if you want to chat anything further, just go at Will Hobson on Twitter. Happy to answer any questions and anything that you want to go through. Sound?
Brilliant. Will,
cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hope you have a good day. Speak soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
So we were due to jump into a short break, you may have noticed on our agenda 15 minutes ago, but we have been kind of going at breakneck pace. So we're just going to push on through straight to the next panel, which I'm really excited about. We've got a brilliant lineup confirmed for this session on measuring digital PR. Just a quick reminder before we do jump into the next session, please do share your thoughts and comments and perspectives on the conference so far using hashtag PRCA Measurement Conf. You can also share comments in the chat box as mentioned, and we're keen to keep this conference as interactive, so please do feel free to get involved. So without further ado, we'll move on to our next panel session, which is focused on measuring digital PR. And moderating this session is Mazen Nahawi, who is the founder and group CEO of CARMA. And Mazen will be introducing the guests that we will be joining on this particular session as well. So Mazen, it's over to you.
Thank you, Corey, and welcome everyone to today's panel. It's my privilege to introduce our 5 panelists, Daryl Sparry, MD and co-founder at Hard Numbers, Shayoni Lin, founder and CEO at Lin PR, James Brockbank, MD at Digital Loft, Thierry Ngutgere, head of data and insights at Rise at 7, and James Crawford, MD at PR Agency 1. Welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, and good effort on pronouncing my name as well. That was good.
Terribly sorry if I didn't nail it.
Oh, you smashed it. I'm not going to lie to you. You probably did better than I would, so I tip my hat.
Thank you. Well, my name isn't too easy either, but welcome everyone and good evening from Dubai. I know all of you were online when we heard Will talking about his campaigns and how he's measuring his campaigns. Our panel tonight is about measuring digital PR. So I'd like to start, James Brockbank. What did you think of that presentation by Will? He showed a wide variety of tools. He showed a wide variety of practices. Is that what you do, and how would you recommend moving forward when it comes?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've known Will quite a long time, and I think Will is very, very, very good at what he does. And I think from a reactive perspective, Will's certainly up there with one of the best in the industry at really pushing forward. I think over the past 12, 18 months as we go through COVID, reactive has become such a big part of all of our strategies. And yeah, I mean, Will is definitely one of the people who's been sort of leading from a public facing perspective and pushing, helping the industry as a whole to push forward on reactive. So yeah, really great, some really, really great points. And I think, yeah, it really leads into the fact, and I think one of Will's closing statements really resonated with me on that actually, if you are turning what you think is a reactive piece into a full-blown campaign with data, with research, with assets, then it's not really a reactive piece. The whole beauty of it is it's fast, it's quick fire. It actually doesn't matter if it doesn't hit in the same way as something you've sunk thousands of pounds and many, many hours into. So yeah, that really, really resonated with me. And yeah, I think, leads us really, really nicely into the discussion here this afternoon on really measuring the impact of it all.
Great, thank you. Thierry, as head of data and insights, what is your approach to doing it right in the digital age, in the social age, and in the COVID age?
Yeah, I think, especially in the COVID age, we were kind of talking about it with Will as well, and trying to discuss what is it that has kind of changed the most, and it's our assumptions. Everything that happened pre-COVID is no longer the same. Everything that we had forecasts and we expected this will happen then, and we had things in our diary, and you've got dates that we were sticking to and saying these things are going to happen X, Y, and Z, just went out the window. And so then for the first time, we couldn't actually see where we were going. And so then that's where the kind of element of Will was talking about, speed and relevancy came out of it. It was the kind of the ability to adjust at pace but still remain relevant for your clients, I think was the biggest thing that kind of came out of COVID. Now, how we then measure relevancy, I guess that's the whole point as well of this kind of panel. But we're stepping into the world now where TikTok determines whether I buy a halter neck top for this weekend's bottomless brunch, So it's one of those things where now it's no longer just as easy to just go, X person has searched for X thing, there we go, job done. It can come from anywhere in any shape or form. And so it's making sure that as analysts, as PR people, as SEO individuals, we are very much open to how the audience behaves and react to that realistically when it comes from a measurement perspective. But yeah, no, it's an exciting time, I'll give you that. And we've all done very, very, very well considering what's happened over the last 2 years.
let's build on that, Thierry. If you're looking at TikTok, what are the numbers you're looking for? How do you capture them and monitor them? And how do you analyze them?
Yeah, so the thing is with TikTok is an interesting one because it's a bit of a black box. You know, they don't let too much out, but then at the same time, they're it's the one thing that everybody's kind of talking about. So what we kind of use that for is an inspiration and a place of understanding where a trend has begun or is a trend occurring at that moment in time. So whether that be the amount of videos that are being used in terms of like hashtags that are being used regards products or trending topics, or even, you know, even dance styles, because some of them are surrounding. So for example, Squid Game had a whole, you know, tidal wave of its own type of content that was produced, and out of the back of that, you know, the Vans trainers, right, became almost like a sellout product as well as the tracksuits. So it's understanding, you know, what is being talked about on TikTok, to what extent does that then become a trend that we can actually see in the wider world? And so then it comes up towards, especially if we've got clients that tap into those markets, right? So Will was talking about how we've got fashion clients. So we'll try and understand of the hashtags, the views, the videos, the competitions going on TikTok, what impact is that having on everything from our perspective, from like a site search or a traffic perspective, or even in terms of the articles that are being shared, are they referencing TikTok as a source of trending and topical culture? And so, yes, it's quite literally being plugged into all of those sources and trying to understand at what point what's the tipping point? I think that's the hard question. What is a tipping point where it becomes a trend that we actually see in high street, or I see my friends wearing the Squid Game tracksuits for Halloween? But yeah, I guess that's something that is up for debate today.
So really paying attention to the trends. Shayoni, from a behavioral science point of view, and you've highlighted that in your bio, tell me about how you're approaching merging that very deep behavioral science that you're focused on with digital measurement of PR and comms.
Yeah, I think I'm quite different on this panel. Oh, my camera did something really strange there. I think I'm quite different on this panel in that we work quite closely with the public sector. So through COVID, we've been in the thick of COVID comms. So we've been using behavioral science to get people to adopt behaviors, get people to access vaccines, get people to do a lot of these public health messages in a very localized manner using behavioral science tactics. So not so much consumer and trying to get people to buy a product or Vans, but very much getting people to take action in a way that they wouldn't. So yes, absolutely, trends and looking at what people are searching, social listening, all of that's really important. Where we are different, I suppose, is an understanding of human behavior, is really sitting down and saying, if we want people to, if we want 16 and 17-year-olds to take the vaccine within 4 weeks, what is stopping them from doing it? Why aren't they doing it consciously? And there are structural and informational reasons why people won't do certain things. And why aren't they doing it cognitively? So what are the human barriers there as a species that's stopping us from taking action? And using that sort of scientific framework and fusing that with creative comms. So we were brought in, for example, in early July to deliver a young person's vaccine campaign for a client in London. And young people, we saw with the vaccination program that the younger the cohort, the more difficult the take up, right? It wasn't what we predicted, in that young people will raise their hands and go, you know, they're educated, they understand the reasons behind why. So we were brought in and we've done quite a lot of primary behavioral science research into why that might happen, not necessarily within London, but outside within England. And we activated a campaign within a week. It was a huge integrated campaign called Don't Miss Your Vaccine. And within 5 weeks, we demonstrated 77.8% improvement in vaccination take-up rates. So yes, digital is important. Yes, getting people onto our campaign platform was important. Getting people to click on to buttons was important. Tracking all of that behavior was important. But did we get people to take the vaccine? And that is how we measure at Lin PR. So we don't, you know, we're seeing with some of our campaigns where the outtakes are brilliant. We've got fantastic engagement rate. We've got fantastic open rates. You know, all of those measurements are brilliant. The take up is not there. So it's really understanding, if there's such high take up from a campaign perspective, what is stopping pregnant women from accessing the vaccine? Where is that gap and how can we close that gap?
Wow. fascinating story. Can you put that in writing and publish it for free?
Oh, for free. Yes. When I have a spare minute, yes.
Well, definitely make that an entry into the AMEC Awards. But thank you for that fascinating story. Daryl, I mean, Shayoni was talking about behavioral science and looking at data from everywhere. Clearly, we live in a social digital world, but not only a social and digital world. There's still an analog human flesh and blood world out there. How do you integrate the influences, the touch points from outdoor, TV, radio, print, with your digital campaigns and your digital measurement?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it's something that is still, I don't want to say the holy grail because everyone always says that, but of marketing, but that attribution piece of like, what was that specific thing that we did and how can we isolate the effect that it had on that? I'm in quite a fortunate position with hard numbers in that most of the clients that we work with aren't spending significant amounts of money above the line or anything like that. So the attribution piece for us is a lot simpler, right? Like we can basically attribute, like brand awareness, like the Google search volume is a great proxy for brand awareness. If the client that you're working with isn't spending loads of money outdoor or on TV or things like that, and if what you're optimizing for, in our case, 9 times out of 10 is a B2B sales outcome for a client, right? It's basically driving leads, driving opportunities to pitch, and ultimately, hopefully, driving sales off the back of it. So I think in one way, we're in quite a fortunate position in that regard, in that the majority of the work that we do is B2B, and the type of clients that we work with and the evaluation that we do is probably a bit simpler, and that's why people like Shayoni and Thierry are much cleverer than me, having to do all these very complicated attribution models and other things like that I'm not smart enough to be able to do.
Well, let me get it closer to home then. What trends are you seeing when it comes to measuring your success, whether it's driving lead generation, SEO success? What do your clients want, and how do you prove it to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple, to be honest. Like the really interesting thing is I bought shares in Peloton, Shopify, Zoom, and a number of other businesses that I thought would be COVID winners, right, back in February 2020. And they did all right for me, right? But if I could have bought shares in the term digital PR, I 100% would have, because I would be a very wealthy man right now, right? Like the type of work that we're doing, clients basically increasingly want, and this is true of consumer and B2B, want to maximize the value of the work that they're doing. So they want to see an SEO outcome and an SEO benefit from the work that they're doing, as well as a brand awareness benefit and all of that kind of stuff, right? So basically, the measurement that we're doing and, the way we measure our effectiveness is around SEO measures. So, referral traffic, keywords in the anchor text, landing pages we're sending traffic to, that's in the coverage we secure, yada, all the things that, Thierry and James would be super familiar with, right? And then we're also looking, at the kind of PR kind of measurement side of things. And then ultimately, as you said, like how many leads have been generated from that activity? If we're in a fortunate enough position to be able to access our client's CRM system, what of those leads are turning into opportunities and what of those opportunities are turning into sales? And even for the clients where we don't have access to their CRM, they normally they like telling us when, our work's led to a sale, because obviously it makes them look good, makes us look good, right?
Sure. So more of the same, but maybe a lot more of it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that point I made about clients increasingly wanting that SEO outcome as well as that kind of brand outcome is key. Anyway.
All right, great, thank you. James Crawford, I'm intrigued. I read about something called OneVal, which has 3 different dimensions to it. It's an evaluation framework that you and your colleagues have created, focused on communications, reputation, and brand.
Yeah.
So if you can tell us a bit about that, maybe follow on the question I had asked earlier to Daryl. in a world which is both digital and analog, where you have different touch points, how would you use one val to say, for example, I want to measure whether people trust me more or less?
Okay, so one of our suite of evaluation products. I'm not going to turn it into a big sales pitch, but they're on the website. We've got a commercial tracker which tracks, SEO outputs, Google Analytics. It's about tracking conversion. It's about the commercial attribution of it, not measuring at the link. We measure at the link level, but that's a breadcrumb towards the conversion. And ideally connecting, your CRM to analytics, so you can measure as if it's a B2B lead, for example, you can measure as a marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead, or using e-commerce tracking, for example, to attribute to sale. That's a great tool for kind of digital PR from a consumer point of view. And obviously we also overlay that with certain brand metrics using Google Search Console data, share of search metrics, that kind of thing. And other kind of SEO tools that we pull into it. Our reputation and brand trackers are based upon a reputation framework devised by one of my business partners. And that's really where PR's been failing to measure, I would say, over the last decade. Reputation is that big intangible that's really difficult to ascertain. It's in the balance sheet under intangible assets somewhere. And so there are 8 kind of KPIs that we track around everything from are you hitting your business objectives? Is the management team credible? Have you created something unique? Do people understand what you've created? I'm not going to go through it all now. I don't want to dominate this entire conversation, but that involves then doing research into customers, into unnamed stakeholders, journalists, and then piecing that together over time. And that's really where a lot of the large corporates are spending a lot of money at the moment, trying to piece together. And then we can give them a dashboard and give the C-suite something to look at that isn't advertising value equivalent or something monstrous like that.
Thank you for that. Sheoni, are we in danger of too much linear thinking when it comes to measurement? Input, output, activity, lead generation, conversion, web traffic, and so on. I've never felt that our minds and hearts are linear in nature. And I do wonder whether the linearity that I hear quite frequently in measurement should probably be more of a circle or a fuzzy scribble. From your point of view, how would you approach connecting the dots? And James a moment ago mentioned trying to bring everything together. What does that mean to you, bringing it all together?
I think it's really important to have a framework. I think it's really important as a practice to subscribe to consistency and be able to sing from the same hymn sheet when we're trying to show the value of what we do to people who don't perhaps understand communications and might purchase things like AVE. So I think it is really useful to have frameworks, whether that is the AMIC framework or the GCS Evaluation 2.0 framework, very, very useful tools to have. But I think ultimately the question we ask at Linpia all the time is, so what? It doesn't matter if we reached X number of people and we generated X number of impressions and we had fantastic engagement rates, or we converted people onto a website and we got all of the SEO we attribute track everything, and we're able to isolate pieces of content on different segments and who did what as a result of what. None of that matters if they don't do what we need them to do. And for me, that is a failure. So we definitely subscribe to that value and that way of thinking at Linpia. Now, sometimes you're not going to achieve it, and that's okay. I mean, AMEC certainly talks about flexibility in objective setting and being able to be realistic. So what we do when we look at a piece of work is firstly, research and insights inform everything we do. Behavior change is about context. What works in one context doesn't work in the other. Behavioral science suffers from replication crisis. So what has worked previously may not work now. What has worked in one context may not work in this context. So whenever we go into any space, we're always experimenting. So we are the only, and I love saying this, and I always qualify when I say we're the only, because I want someone to come and challenge me and say, no, we are doing this as well. I'll be very, very happy. But to my knowledge, we're the only agency that has adopted experimentation into every piece of work we do. And so that is not focus groups. It is not surveys. It's none of that. It's naturalistic testing quantitatively. So we let out into the wild a whole suite of control versus treatment variables, and we see what works. And we are not bought into anything. We might have done our research and insights and come up with a great creative concept, and we think, that is the solution to this problem. If the audience doesn't think that, so if they gravitate towards a control and all our lovely creatives, assets, messaging just does not work, that's fine. And we'll absolutely park it and go with the control. So I think it's that agility and responsiveness to audience behavior. I think that is what drives the outcomes that we secure at LinPR. So we are doing real-time tracking on every piece of work. We've got every piece of content tracked across our, sometimes we have 64 segments on a campaign. That's how detailed and granular we get across several channels. So we're looking at every piece of activity across all our campaigns, across all our segments, across all our channels, and with the ultimate aim of are people doing what we want them to do? And when they're not doing that, we're changing tack really, really quickly. So I think it is about, yes, to a framework, yes, to that consistency and chronology of how we work as a practice, but ultimately not stopping at outputs or outtakes and going beyond and being able to prove the effectiveness of communications in business outcomes.
All right, I'm not going to challenge you on you being the only one doing it, but I'm going to challenge you on putting it into easier English.
Yeah.
Natural experimentation. That means, organic yogurt to me in the morning after a long night out. What do you mean by natural experimentation in research?
We are PR people. I have to have a sexy word to say it, right? Otherwise, we won't buy it. So they are randomized trials. So it is removing the human bias and quantitatively testing different solutions against a control. So control would be typically what a client does or has done in the past, and treatments are informed by behavioral science. So they could be frames, they could be creative ideas, it could be calls to action. There's a whole host of different levers that we can pull based on the research and insights. So if our research and insights, so for example, when we were brought in to do Don't Miss Your Vaccine, over 18 Don't Miss Your Vaccine, which since then has been recognized as one of the best young people vaccine campaigns that there was, which is brilliant. But the reason we were able to move that at speed in a week as an integrated campaign was because we'd done this research, which showed that young people weren't motivated by community. They were frustrated, they were scapegoated, they were just tired, they wanted to get on with their lives. What they really wanted was personal benefit. So we changed the whole narrative on vaccination and said, if you're waiting, whatever your reason, do it for that. Do it for clubbing, do it for going out, do it for travel. Just moved all of that community message away. So that protect yourself, your family, your community, park that. And we did the personal benefit. And we tested that before we did it. So we felt that personal benefit would work, but we tested that against that control and safety messaging, and personal benefit spiked. Now, within that subsection, you can start seeing, okay, certain segments prefer social proof. So if you then have messaging that talks about how other people around them are behaving in a certain way, that motivates to do some, a certain behavior. Certain segments preferred a prompt. So they just were forgetting to access the vaccine. And they were motivated when we reminded them to do so. That is one part of the puzzle. The other part is choice architecture. So once you're pushing people into a specific journey, what is the decision-making environment? How are we presenting choices to them? And is it presented in an effective, easy to understand and easy to action way? So we strip all of the, public health is a complex space and it's quite difficult to navigate. So we strip all of that out and we create a user journey, or in behavioral science terms, choice architecture, that is effective and resonant of how people think intuitively and instinctively. So it makes that journey to action as easy as possible. Does that help?
Wow. Absolutely.
Sorry for the jargon. It's because we talk like this all the day. So,
Well, I mean, I definitely have to have lunch with you and Richard one day and talk more, but that's
happy to go to Dubai, no problem at all.
You're welcome. You're welcome. James Brockbank, natural experimentation at your shop?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, certainly not in the same way, and I'm going to sort of repeat what Daryl's just put in the chat, that Sharon is much cleverer than me. Yeah, I stand by that for 100%. I think in terms of, experimentation and some of the things that really stood out to me and how I relate that to what we do. And I mean, we're probably working in very, very different sectors. We're predominantly consumer focused and, with consumer goods. And I think, on that side of it is you can never nobody gets it right first time. And I think, learning from, and, digital PR should be a constant evolution of what's working, what's not working, and really looking at the bigger picture on what's working for other people and what isn't working for others right now. It moves so incredibly fast, as Thierry said. What was, almost expected to map out at the start of 2020 didn't happen. And I think, the last 2-3 days has shown us that we actually don't know what's coming, not just today, but, in the next few days, in the next, in the next months. And we have to be able to be reactive for that. And I think, the almost the experimental side of it, we can tie it also back into how we think about campaigns really from the outset. If we are, and if I look at what we were doing, pre-COVID, we were running an awful lot of, probably 90% of what we were doing was large scale data studies. It was, large interactive complex assets that took weeks and weeks to produce. And we've shifted almost completely away from that to much, much simpler, almost approaches that, are they more effective nowadays? Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the key reasons. But I think the thing is, we were all in a position at the start of COVID. I think any of us here can relate to it, where we had to shelve campaigns because actually we'd sunk time, we'd sunk resources into them, and almost having that, that mindset of being reactive, but also, being, experimenting at the same time. None of us can guarantee 100% what will and won't stick from a PR perspective. But in going in with, I think a lot of it comes down to mindset, and I talk about, mindset a lot, both with the team here and at various conference talks, etc. And I think, the whole concept of digital PR as a whole is largely, the success and the approaches, it is largely dictated by that mindset, and I mean, I come from an SEO background, and I think, almost, going against what I would have said 4 or 5 years ago, one of the things that we challenge any campaign that we put out on is, would we still do this if Google didn't exist? Now, we are 70% of the time being engaged by clients' SEO teams to impact organic traffic, impact organic growth. But one of the things that we always ask is, if Google didn't exist, would we still be doing this? If the answer is no, then we wouldn't run that activity, because we need to be thinking on it on a perspective of, okay, how's this impacting brand? How's this impacting sales and revenue? The sort of hard metrics, not just building links from an SEO side. And I think, when you get into that almost approach of, well, if Google didn't exist, we would be doing this activity because of X, Y, and Z. And usually that's going to be driving sales. That's going to be awareness, trust associations, referral traffic. When you can go in with that mindset, you almost put yourself in a very, very different position, because you're thinking about the audience. You're doing things that are audience focused and approaching digital PR in that way. And I think we are, Daryl, you said, before, if you could have bought shares in digital PR, and yeah, I completely agree, with the growth we've seen. But I think off the back of that, there's also this level of growth where it's become a buzzword. There are, in my opinion, a lot of people working in, or certainly trying to get into digital PR, who, they're still using it as a link building tactic through and through and nothing else. And I think, to me, we're in a dangerous position there, because, there are certainly the conversations we have. And one of the things I sort of my theory for next year is, we're going to see a bit of an influx on in-house marketers going, what have we actually paid for? They've had KPIs in place which are measured on number of links, and actually then they go, and I think it's absolutely going to happen. They're going to turn around and go, but what was the actual real impact there? Where was the growth in traffic? Where was the growth in sales? And I think we're in this dangerous position where, digital PR has grown so fast, and on one side it's good, but I think there's going to be challenges next year, and it comes down to measurement. It all comes down to measurement. I know certainly, over the past 12 months, one of our big focuses as an agency has been moving away from setting KPIs and goals on the number of placements, the number of links, and tying that back to organic traffic. When we are looking at it from, predominantly an SEO perspective, it's how are we impacting organic traffic? How are we contributing to that growth? And is the activity we're doing the right activity to drive growth against those measures? Not just saying, have we built 20 links, 30 links? Because actually, any of us can go and do that. But actually, if it's not the right activity, you can go and build 20 links, 25 links, 100 links, 1,000 links, and have absolutely no impact if it's not the right activity. So I think, from, bringing it back to a measurement perspective, we have to be thinking about what are those sort of real business metrics, and moving away from the, some of the SEO metrics and the, the more intangible
On the issue of good metrics, Daryl, we've got a variety of different metrics out there. Some of them are very good, some of them are vanity metrics, some are complete rubbish. What are you doing with your team and your clients to move away from bad metrics to good metrics? And can you give an example?
Yeah, 100%. If you really echo everything that James has said, love what he said about, and it's not one of the number one questions we always ask as well before we do anything. If Google didn't exist, would we still do this, right? And I think that's a really, really smart methodology. And to Shayane's point as well, work back from what is the ultimate objective that you want to achieve using the AMEC integrated framework and do that. You know, in our business, if you're measuring yourself and your impact based on the quantity of activity, right? You're making yourself a busy fool. If all you're doing is optimizing for and reporting number of links, just in the same way as number of placements, number of articles, items of cov, you know, all the rest of it. If you're only optimizing and reporting that, then you know you're making yourself a busy fool. It's why at Hard Numbers we don't do timesheets. We don't charge our clients by hour. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you hate doing timesheets, then we're hiring at all levels. Get in touch at Daryl Sperry on Twitter. But basically, that's why we don't, we don't think in terms of the amount of time it's taken to achieve an outcome for a client, right? It's have we achieved the outcome for the client, and we work everything back from that. So I think, you know, I'd encourage anyone to, every member of the Hard Numbers team has the AMEC measurement framework tattooed somewhere on their person. It varies person to person. I won't tell you where mine is. But we all, work back from the ultimate objective that we want to achieve, work back from there, then go, okay, how are we going to do it? What are the, the outtakes that we want to drive? What are the, what's the activity that we're going to have to do to achieve that, and we go from there.
Well, there's a flood of CVs going to both of your agencies right now. I don't see too many questions in the chat, Corey. So unless you want me to stop, I'm just going to keep on asking a few questions because we have a fantastic panel. Thierry, in your mind, what are the right metrics? Every situation, every client is clearly unique, but what do you feel are the driving metrics which together provide quality reporting to a client who really wants to know whether things are working or not?
To be honest, firstly, Daryl, thank God you said no timesheets. And it's pretty much echoing exactly what James has said as well. Like ultimately, in the space that we work, it comes down to organic traffic. You know, how many people have I driven to my shop, regardless of whatever that conversion issue is there. It is pretty much how many people have I driven. Now, one thing I'm really always interested in as well is measuring the metrics that cause the stimulus for change, right? So what is it that we are using in order to try and change that consumer's behavior or drive that kind of intent? Now, from a large scale perspective, so whether it's, link building, for example, instead of going, oh, we're going to be counting the amount of links, make yourself a busy fool, like Daryl mentioned, how about we kind of focus on, Will had a slide in his presentation that looked at the publications in which we've built links that have driven the most traffic and therefore the most transactions, right? So that's a very smart way of looking at something that's quite an arbitrary number, really, because you could build 400 links and one person convert, and then, as I say, you're just a busy fool from that perspective, right? So it's taking the metrics that you already have as well and just making them a little bit more intent focused. What is it that you want people to actually physically do, and measuring that right at the beginning. And so then internally at Rise at 7, we have a measurement strategy, because we saw that exact same trend as well, where people are like, I want 8,000 links, and it's like, all right, great, but so what on earth does that actually mean? And this measurement strategy helps us to also kind of turn that mirror back onto the client as well and say, yes, this was the thing that we were accountable for, but this is then the impact it's then had on that, right? So yes, great, we built the links, but what has that had on in terms of actual transactions, revenue, kind of bottom line for your business? What has that actually done in terms of brand as well? Because a lot of that kind of activity can be quite brand damaging if you're just going in like a bull in a china shop. And what is that wider impact outside of that direct I want kind of mentality? So yeah, I don't think there is a right group of metrics to say, okay, these ones are the best, everything else is pants. But I think it is all about the intent that you're trying to drive, and then those metrics will kind of come out in that kind of objective focus, where you're focusing on your consumers and not just end result.
Before I get back to James, one question for you, Thierry, from Rebecca Fitzgerald. What's the best way to find TikTok trends?
Oh yeah, so I've got quite a cool way of doing it. So there's a company called Fanbytes. Give them a Google. They're doing some really cool stuff. They built an internal tool that looks at TikTok trends, so they're awesome. There's a load of things like Hype Order as well. I think that I've had TikTok built into their offerings. I know they do YouTube, Instagram, etc. All the big people. But what I've actually been using is music. So TikTok is predominantly driven by the trend is the music, right? So what I do is I follow the music, and then if I can understand, okay, these are the top 20 trending songs, then I can have a look down. I can scrape and see the predominant hashtags that are going on, and then categorize by content type as well to understand, okay, this one's fashion, this one's this one's that. And if you follow the music with TikTok, you'll actually never fail. So a really good tool that I use then is one called Sound Charts as well. They're awesome, and they track essentially the popularity of music globally, but they then have a filter for TikTok, and so you can follow it that way. It's awesome. But yeah, there's no
Fanbytes and Sound Charts.
Fanbytes and Sound Charts.
Right. Yeah. All right. Great. James, final question for tonight's panel. Top metrics. What do you recommend to your clients to get the truth?
Yeah, so if we're talking digital PR, we've got to be talking about conversions, and you've got to focus on that. And with my Amex hat on, I'm a board director at Amex with Richard and a few of the guys. That framework, the Amex framework, is really focused on outcomes, and I would say everything else is just a trail of breadcrumbs to that point. And if you're not measuring those outcomes, then what's the point? You're just another link monkey. It's backed up. It's like it's 2011 again, and we're spamming Google before the Penguin update came along. Come on, guys, we've got to get better than that. So you've got to get better at measurement. You've got to turn away those RFPs that are just saying, I want 1,000 links and that's it, because it's not going to make you happy, rich, or famous. Just get on with doing good work the right way. Get rid of the losers who are doing it the wrong way, and they can go to some 2-bob budget firm down the road and just focus on the true path of focusing on outcomes.
Well, that's a great way to end tonight's panel, but I think each of you has brought in fantastic insight and really wonderful contribution. So my thanks to each and every one of you, Shayoni, James, Daryl, Thierry, and Richard, who's there, along with Corey. Thank you to the audience who followed, and I'm happy to hand back to Corey. Good night, everyone from Dubai.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Mazin, and indeed thanks to all of our panelists. That was a really fascinating session, plenty to chew through there. Thank you to everyone who's taken part and contributed their thoughts and perspectives on social media. We've had some really good contributions so far. Please do feel free to join in with that using hashtag PRCA Measurement Conf. We're now going to move into the final keynote of the conference, and I'm delighted to introduce Scott Guthrie, who's going to be talking about measuring the impact of influencer marketing. So Scott offers professional advisory services to the influencer marketing industry. He is a guest university lecturer, a top 10 PR blogger, a host of the Influencer Marketing Lab podcast, and media commentator. Scott also leads the influencer marketing trade body, the IMTV, which is a recently formed not-for-profit professional membership organization dedicated to building a robust, sustainable future for the influencer marketing industry. And I'm sure that's something that we'll be touching on in our discussion as well. As always, please do drop in your questions either in the Q&A box or the chat function, and I can get as many of those as possible to Scott after his keynote speech. Scott, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Corey, for those generous words. Let me just pull up my slide. Just bear with me. Can you see that, Corey? Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, all good.
Right, perfect. Right, so I got 20 minutes. I listened to the tail end of the last talk, and so there may be a little bit of overlap, but please indulge me. I'm talking about influencer marketing. I'm talking about the impact of influencer marketing campaigns. We've got 20 minutes. So I'm just going to give a very rough, broad brushstroke approach to a measurement framework and give you some sort of guidelines for your next influencer marketing campaign. This is more of an introductory, so forgive me if I'm teaching many of you to suck eggs, but peppered throughout this talk, there are a few up-to-date stats and things to think about as well. So the first thing I wanted to touch on is that there is a workflow, just as in other disciplines, in other communication and marketing channels, there is a workflow around influencer marketing. It's not just a matter of tickling your tummy and say, get me Mr. Beast on the phone or get me KSI. There is a recognized process of identifying who your audience is, who influences that audience. But we're just going to talk about the planning phase and the measurement phase of that workflow in the next 20 minutes. Because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to know if you've arrived, and if you've arrived in the right place? So within the framework, there are 6 items. There's the goal. What overriding goal? What is your main aim of your campaign, of your program? And from that aim, how are you going to measure it? Then the metrics required within that measurement, that aim. And then some numbers. Are you being realistic with that numbers? Are you over-indexing? Are you under-indexing? Are these numbers being realistic given the time horizons you have and also the budget at your disposal? We'll talk about a little bit about time horizons, and maybe we should be working on different time horizons simultaneously. And then ultimately, what is the impact of the business? So first things first, what is your objective? And just really trying to make it as simplistic as possible. I've broken it down to the 3 main phases. Are you building awareness? Are you building consideration? Or are you converting? Are you building action? So within awareness, that might be brand awareness, that might be reaching the most appropriate people with your campaign. Not always the biggest numbers, but the most appropriate people are aware of what you're trying to achieve and aware of your brand and aware of what you're doing. It might be consideration, so igniting engagement within the most appropriate people, nudging them to find out more about your product, nudging them to find out more about you, reading reviews, for example, doing comparisons with other products. Or are you finally at the bottom of the funnel, and are you enticing them towards action? So not all influencers are adept at all 3 phases. Some are amazing at building awareness and getting people excited. They might have large reach, but they're not so good at converting into action. Some, on the other hand, some influencers are very good at offering discount codes, for example, and affiliate links, but they don't have that authentic view and they don't have that mise en scène, which might chime with your brand values. And if you're trying to build brand equity, then that might not be the right sort of fit for you. So different influencers perform better at different parts of this sort of conversion funnel. So once we realize what the main aim is, we then just work out what are we trying to measure within that aim? How are we going to realize that our goal? And so that might be real reach, and we'll come on to that in a second, but that might be impressions and brand recall and brand uplift if we're looking at awareness. That might be, if we're at the consideration phase, that might be engagement rate. That might be the dwell time, you're pulling eyeballs from social media onto your website. That might be click through to a landing page or Instagram link stickers. or it might be right at the bottom and the conversion element. It might be sales, it might be app downloads, but it might be also how many signatures you've got on a petition, or have you got, if we're talking about in the political arena, has the politician that you've been working with got into power? So what are the different actions, and how are you going to measure those points? Thirdly, it's what metric will you use? And so again, if we're at the top of the funnel, that might be cost per mil, that might be impressions. If we're at the middle phase, that might be cost per engagement, cost per click, and at the bottom, it might be cost per acquisition. But again, it might, these are the desired change. Well, how are we going to measure that the desired change has occurred? How many sales have been made because of the influencer marketing campaign? How many apps have been downloaded? How many signatures are on a petition? And so for that, you can use discount codes. You can use trackable shopping links, the Instagram shop, and those sorts of items. I think 5 years ago there was a paucity of data, and there was a lot of sort of tickling your tummy and seeing what worked for you. I think there is possibly the pendulum's slipping, going too far the other direction now, and this deification of data. But there is an important point here, and especially when we come to things that are outside of our control, like the algorithms for each social media platform. So if we look at social follow accounts, for example, this theoretical reach. Here is a report undertaken by Kitley. Kitley is an Australian startup based out of Sydney, but they offer media kits, but the media kits with a difference because they have access to the first-party data within Instagram and Facebook, and I think now TikTok as well as YouTube. So that means that they can give, when you're compiling results with an influencer, you can see the real data, not a screenshot version of the data, but the real data as it's come out of the back. The point here is that although you might have, let's say, 50 to 100,000 followers, that would be your theoretical reach. The average reach, actually, due to the algorithm, will be about 1 in 3 of that reach, about 32, 33%. So the point here is that we have to start moving away from these vanity metrics towards more intent metrics and impact metrics. Having said that, when asked what are the most used measurements, still 84% said that they look at engagement rates. And this was by a big white paper conducted by Influence Intelligence, which is owned by Axiom, the Centaur Group. So a nice white paper produced at the beginning of the year, but with some robust figures. So what is engagement rate here? They've combined comments and likes and content share. So there's a bit of a broad church here. I think it's important when we are measuring engagement that we try and tease out what we're trying to measure. So likes I equate as the digital grunt. It's the sort of the lowest digital signal there is in town. A comment gives you a little bit more understanding, and that's a little bit more meaningful, but not if the comment is great job or just an emoticon of a starry-eyed orange figure. So it has to be a sort of a more meaningful exchange. Is it nudging the conversation on? And is that engagement, are we measuring purely numbers or the sentiment behind that engagement as well? And the third thing I think to remember around engagement rates is, are we measuring engagement rates in the round, or are we looking at purely sponsored content engagement rates? Because some influencers, they will put a lot of effort into their organic content and they'll have relatively high engagement rates, but when they come to do a sponsored collaboration, the engagement rates might be lower. So look at engagement rates in the round. Are you calculating organic content and paid for content when you're equating like for like? Here you can see here as well as me that 65% of influencer marketers look at traffic to their site as the second largest indicator of what they're measuring. And thirdly, impression data. So thankfully, we're sort of moving away. A couple of years ago, impression data would have been at the top. It's moving down the charts, but we still need to move on away from the sort of vanity towards intent and impact metrics. Again, when they're asked what tools and methods do you use to track performance, 60% said campaign analytics provided by the influencer. And again, there are many tools, and I think one of the speakers in the last talk talked about Hype Auditor, for example, but there's also Social Blade. Kitly is another example of tools we can have real-time access to the real first-party data that comes from an influencer. So you're not beholden to them remembering to send you their data and then sending you a snapshot of their data. Sending you a screenshot has two potential issues. One, as I say, it's a moment in time, it's a snapshot, and so that deteriorates as soon as they've done the screen grab. Secondly, it is open to being tinkered with and Photoshop. Not that this is a large problem, but something of note. It's better to get first-party access to that data. Another element when we're talking about how to measure the impact of influencer marketing, putting the workflow together, is what time horizon do you have? And when I think of time horizons, there are two elements here. One, when you are guillotining the point in time where you are going to start measuring or stop measuring the content, and also how long a campaign runs. So again, Kitly did some research at the beginning of the year. They found that normally on an Instagram influencer campaign, a report is run after 2 weeks of the campaign running. But if so, that report obviously go back to the client. But then if you took another snapshot 2 months later, i.e., after 10 weeks after the activation, then you'll benefit from a 44% uplift in the number of impressions and a 40% uplift in the number of reach engagement as well. So think about where that point of time when you are stopping measuring. Also think about the time horizons, and I alluded at the beginning about where should marketers and where should communicators be playing at in terms of influencer marketing, what time horizons. So so Pandora, the jewelry makers and sellers, they work with influencers on two different time horizons and with two different teams in-house. Their digital team works with influencers on a very transactional basis. They're determined on links and driving eyeballs back to the Pandora website, but also their PR department works with influencers on building that brand equity. So the digital team will work on very short turnaround times and short time frames. And you can see instantly, obviously we had Black Friday just before the weekend. And so you'll be able to tell exactly how quickly or how many eyeballs were driven back to the Pandora site. But for the PR team, they're building brand equity and they're making sure the content is created is in line with their mise-en-scène, is in line with their worldview, their values. The content is aspirational but attainable. So measuring that uplift in brand uplift, that could be measured in quarters and half years, not in days and weeks. So think about what you're trying to achieve and the time horizon you have to achieve it. So I promised you a whistle-stop tour of this, and this is a very sort of helicopter view of measurement in influencer marketing at a glance. Start off with the goal, work out what you're going to measure, work out the metric you have, the target numbers that are achievable within your budget and time frame, work out the time horizon, and work out the impact. But wait, there's more. When we think about influencer marketing, we're thinking about it as a distribution channel. And of course, it is a distribution channel, but it's an authentic, creative distribution channel. But more and more often, we are working with brands who want to repurpose that creative content. and they want to repurpose the content to put it on their own brand channels and on different channels, for example, out of home on posters and billboards. So when we think about what's the impact and the return on investment, we have to think about the cost comparison, the speed comparison, and the quality comparison about having a content creator create this content versus having a creative director and a stylist and a videographer and a producer and a writer on board. So what are the purposes we're doing it? Does it have an afterlife? Will it be part of your online catalog, for example? Will it be on your home site? There's a big buzz this year or for 2022 about social commerce, or the QVCification of influencer marketing. And social commerce demands lots and lots and lots of content. So are you going to create that yourself in-house with your own stylists and producers and writers, or are you going to work in concert with the content creator? And how are you going to measure the return on that? I think it's important to note, that we no longer work in silos. PR bleeds into marketing and into advertising. But influencer marketing is increasingly moving from the sidelines, from the peripheries, and becoming the beating heart of multi-channel planning integrations. And some work done recently by Wayla, an influencer marketing platform and creative company. They worked out that that our memory of a television commercial increases if we've first seen related influencer content, that we're less likely to skip through a YouTube ad if we first watched the influencer-led campaign on TikTok, and we've become more emotionally invested in Instagram content if we've first seen it on TikTok. And the numbers are significant. It's a 13% uplift of memory for TV ads. It's a 31% reduction in the number of times we will skip through an ad when we see it around a bit of content we're interested in on YouTube. And a 27% uplift in more emotionally invested in Instagram. Also, I jotted down somewhere on my page, but I think there's also a 43% uplift in how memorable that piece of content is on Instagram if you've first seen it on TikTok as well. So it's not just about whether it should be influencer marketing or television advertising or public relations. It's about it's about how each discipline can work in concert with each other as a priming effect to create long-term memory and ultimately to have impact on that campaign. So slowing down now, coming towards the end of the talk, just when we think about measuring the impact, obviously we're thinking about marketing objectives or communication objectives, but how do they dovetail with our corporate objectives, our organizational objectives? We think about the short term, of course, we're in a do everything by yesterday world, but also we think about the short term horizons and the long time horizons. When we're thinking about what we're going to measure and the return on investment, who's doing the measuring, and are the same ratios being used organizational wide? Is the CMO talking to the CEO? Is the CEO talking to the CFO? And are people, as everybody within the organization, calculating on the same ratios? And we also have to be honest and upfront about putting some money aside to do the measurement and evaluation properly, but being aware of that it is an additional cost, but it's an additional cost to make your campaign more effective. We think about influencer marketing in terms of selling stuff, in terms of selling stuff. But we've also seen through the COVID pandemic that influencers have many different use cases, or influencer marketing has many different use cases. So we've seen the World Health Organization and the United Nations, for example, turn to influencers to carry those important messaging about social distancing and washing your hands and wearing a face mask. the Finnish government reclassified influencers as core workers last year because of their ability to tap into parts of society that no longer actively engaged in legacy or traditional media the same way, no longer watching free-to-air television in quite the numbers they were, no longer reading a newspaper, no longer listening to the radio. So it's not just about selling stuff, but also about different use cases. We saw it at the beginning of the year in the race for the White House, or the end of last year rather, with a race to the White House. Michael Bloomberg and Joe Biden tapped into influencers as part of their political campaigning, their race to the White House. We saw it in the Netherlands with reducing the number of fatalities and serious injuries on the Dutch national railway system. And we saw it in Germany, and we're raising the number of stem cell donors we've seen there. So influencer marketing has many different use cases, and within many different use cases, there are, of course, many different ways to measure the success of that campaign. That is me done. I will stop sharing now, Corey. Hopefully that was of some benefit. If not, I'm sure the other people listening in will tell me and ask me some questions.
Scott, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Every time I listen to you, I'm it's always the case that I learn something new, and today was no exception. So thanks very much for your time and for your effort on those slides. We've had some interesting questions which have come through already, but I'd like to start with one of my own, if I could. One of the things that struck me about your presentation was the fact that the industry as a whole and as its approach to measurement seems to be maturing. And is that a view that you share? And what do you think is driving that the evolution? Because we're talking about a relatively young industry in contemporary terms. So interested to get your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks, Corey. Yeah, well, influencer marketing is 30-fold the size it was in 2015. Not 30% up, 30-fold, 30 times the size it was. Was $500 million. Now it's forecast to be 13.8 billion by the end of this year. We contribute 9.7% of social media to social media advertising, but just 2 years ago that was 7.7. So we're moving at colossal speed. Globally, influencer marketing contributes around I think 2.3% of global advertising spend. But again, in 2019 it was 1.3. So we're growing at a lick. And while we're doing that, I think a short answer without being too glib is it works. And we're seeing that it works. And we're seeing, whereas the press and publications were a bit sniffy about influencer marketing a few years ago, we've seen big brands moving into the space and telling the press that they're moving into space. We saw L'Oreal a couple of years ago saying it. We saw Martin Sorrell saying he's digital first, and he acquired influencer marketing agency as one of the first acquisitions. So there's more money going into it. Just last week, LTK, which is an influencer company platform, had an investment of 300 million. So the company is now valued at 2 billion. So there is money coming in, and unlike the last gold rush in 2016, 2017, there is now some data to support that it works. And part of that is through having proper workflows and to be talking with our peers like we are today about how can we learn from each other and get the best practice moving forward.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And like you said, it's not the breadth and the kinds of organizations who are seeing success from it has grown exponentially. And I think that the example that you pointed with the Finnish government considering influencers as key workers kind of underlines that really well. We've had, as I said, quite a few questions that have come in on the chat and the Q&A function. One comes from Ger Peerboom, and I think it's a Dutch name. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ger asked, during the pandemic, we have seen more people getting online for businesses and in private. Did you see a change in the influencer approach due to the increased levels of online activity?
Yeah, 100%. And the ones that succeeded are the ones that have, you're influential because you have impact on a community. And the ones that had realized that, they wanted to help their community. So we saw new influencers, people with communities, but moving into different space. We saw, Joe Wicks, for example, he did those extraordinary workouts for the best part of a year, I think. That's just, one example. We saw lots of chefs that showed you how to do things. So it wasn't just about making money, it was about how to help the community. And I think there is sometimes a conflation between celebrity TV reality stars that all of a sudden have a big Instagram following thrust on them, and social media influencers that have spent a long time honing their craft and built the community. And that's why we had all those terrible headlines at the beginning of the year when these reality TV stars went off to Dubai, and it didn't really pass the smell test. But but an influencer knows what their community wants and what it doesn't want, and what it likes and what it doesn't like. So we talk about brands vetting influencers, increasingly influencers vet brands. So yes, absolutely, there's been a change in the way that the successful influencers speak and has been speaking about the last 18 months. It's that the content has been a lot less flashy. It's been a lot less look at me, and a lot more, how about you? How can I help you?
Yeah, more grown up.
Yeah, more grown up, yeah.
Sorry, another question that's come in here from Max Dealey. He says, we've had some challenges on measuring the performance of internal influencers on LinkedIn. And the process is incredibly time consuming and manual because there are limitations around how we're able to analyze data on this platform. Any experiences working with influencers on LinkedIn and how they've been able to demonstrate results and value?
That's another great question. And I think that B2B influencer marketing is kind of this big untapped area within the discipline. And if anything, it's more honest, I think, than B2C, because I think lots of B2B influencers already have a day job and they're trying to be better at their day job by doing influencer marketing. The simple answer about LinkedIn is, I don't know. Well, you can't rather not, I don't know, because it's proprietary data, and they're very parsimonious with giving out access to that data, to their data. So, all I can say is, LinkedIn is obviously the place to be. It was Twitter, maybe it will again with Jack's move yesterday. But it's difficult, as I said, to have access to all the data. The Sales Navigator gives you an extra layer, but it's still not a great degree.
Thanks. Another question from Mia Cotrain. She asks, are there any tools you would recommend using to assess an influencer's audience besides the information and metrics they would provide you directly?
Yeah, again, yes. All these questions are great. It depends on your budget, because if you have the budget, it's good to get access to a tool like Tagger Media or Whaler or Influencer, or Tracker, or even they're expensive, but there are lots of different versions you can access to. If you can't, and you're doing sort of a DIY approach, then turn to free or freemium tools like Social Blade, and then just put in the profile name in there, and they will tell you about that gives you access to follow accounts and how subscribe accounts and how they're tracking up over the weeks and months. So you can see if there's a sudden uptick, that might be a potential red flag suggesting that they might have bought following or bought engagement. It's a potential red flag. There might be a perfectly honest reason why they've done it. They might have been on a TV show, for example. They might have had a really successful campaign. Even Mr. Beast, who normally tracks about 100,000 new subscribers a day, when he did his Squid Game video last week, he got an uptick of about 1.4 million people subscribing every day for the next 4 days. So, so it's a potential red flag. So Hype Auditor, which another speaker mentioned, and there are if you sort of Google those, there will no doubt there'll be some ads that come up to other ones. But those are the two that I would use to get a more rounded view that's free to access.
Great. Time for one, just our final question really before we wrap up for today. No name attached to this one, it's an anonymous one, but the question is, how can organizations use data to choose or select influencers for campaigns? It's great to measure success, but can we also use data to help decision-making on this front?
Yeah, 100%. And those same tools work out that I've just mentioned will give you access to, you want someone that, that meshes with your audience. And so, if you're a UK brand, you don't want someone that looks right, but all of their audience is in Brazil, for example. Yeah. So it has to be the geolocation has got to be there, the gender has got to be there, the gender, what degree, the age has got to be there. All of those tools, you can do that, but also be mindful that that works in concert with the contextual intelligence of the practitioner. It's not always computer says no, because if you rely purely on data, at best you'll be effective, but you won't always be, at best you'll be efficient, but you won't always be effective. It has to work in concert with human intuition.
Absolutely. Scott, thank you so much for your time today and for taking the time to answer those questions. We really appreciate it. And
it's my absolute pleasure, Kare. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Cheers, Scott. Take care. So that brings us to the end of this year's PRCA Measurement Conference. Huge thank you to all of you for tuning in today. Particular thanks to our speakers and panelists and to our sponsors, CARMA. There have been so many highlights from today's conference, and it's really difficult to pick out the ones that stand out. But I think one of the themes that has struck me and really stayed with me relates back to something that Richard Bagnall mentioned a little bit earlier on when he was talking about how we don't want to be busy fools counting stuff merely for the sake of it. And I think that relates to anything, whether we're talking about coverage or links. We really need to focus on proving our own value and not necessarily the value of the measurement activity. Again, thank you to our headline sponsors, CARMA, for making this conference possible. We're very grateful for their support. Do please look out for an email that will be going out from our events team, which will include a link to this session, so you'll be able to watch back any bits that you've missed and also pass those on along to any colleagues. And all that's left for me to do is say a massive thank you to all of you again for joining us, and we hope to see you at an event very soon. Thank you very much.